there might be breaks in which I read chats. I really doubt I'm gonna get a lot of chats. Hold on. Stop reading like constantly. So I'm not
Okay, well there
gonna.
is
I'm
audio.
gonna
If there's an
read.
audio problem, so we'll be playing my computer to the limit because not only will I be reading for like um where did my thing go? For like not only will I be reading for probably like an hour because it's a very long article, but I'm also gonna be trying to record this audio because I want to use the audio to edit later. And ideally, I have basically two sets of audio because ideally I'll have the YouTube audio because that will record, and then also the DaVinci Resolve audio to see which one's better. I think the DaVinci Resolve audio is usually better because I usually just cuts out background noise more. I turned off my fan and stuff to try to get this working. I should probably let people know that I am streaming. So we'll go to Twitter and Blue Sky. To YouTube channel. It's gonna take us a little bit to get set up, but so identification on Twitch. Okay. So we just think about make sure everything's in place. Okay, I guess the DaVinci Resolve. So if this shit makes my computer shit itself, something that have to go off. I really I really prefer for this to say project 1 save import media. We'll grab the video. It's just kind of funny. I don't know why. I don't. There's probably a way around this, but usually it doesn't start recording audio unless they put something in the visual. So I usually just throw in a picture or something as like a placeholder, while I then go to the audio tab. Also, it's probably gonna end up being a pain in the ass later because normally when I record by myself, I can just sort of like stop recording my audio whenever I want to like check something. But here, the YouTube is continuously going even though it's being recorded. So I had to be. I probably have to go through and like cut out all like the stuff where I'm not saying anything. Patch in, arm to record.
Record.
Fuck,
Fuck,
there's that
there's that
shit in the
shit in the
background.
background.
How do
How
I
do I
deal with
deal with
this?
this?
Um, I
I
can't
can't
tell
tell
if it's
if
like
it's
my
like my
mic
mic
or
or
if
if
it's
it's
like
like
my
my
computer
computer,
because
because
sometimes it
sometimes it
doesn't
doesn't
show
show
up
up,
and
and
sometimes
sometimes
I
I
hear it
hear
and
it
it
and then it
doesn't show
doesn't
up
show
like
up
in
like in
post,
post,
and I
and I
don't know
don't
what
know
the
what the
fucking
fucking
problem
problem
is.
is.
Um,
Um,
can
can
try
try
adjusting
adjusting
maybe,
maybe,
but
but
okay.
okay.
Here's what
Here's what
we're
we're
gonna
gonna
do.
do.
We're
We're
gonna
trying to
save
save
project.
project.
I'll close. So number just goes away. I don't know what's causing it. We might just say fuck it, and this might be in the final version. And if it is, I'm gonna fucking pull a gun on myself. I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna hate myself so much if I can't get this shit to go away. It's so loud, and I don't understand because it seems like it's on my computer sometimes, but sometimes it doesn't. Okay. Okay, what we might need to do is I want to be extra sure. I just don't want to deal with this later because I'm gonna hate this. Sorry, we're gonna take a little small detour before we get to the Hunter x Hunter content.
First step is going to Fairlight tab on where you're having your voice recording. Here's how you can remove the background noise in the free version of DaVinci Resolve. My voiceover is located on audio channel number 1, so I'm gonna go in audio channel number 1 mixer. I'm gonna click on the plus sign next to effects. I'm gonna go to restoration and I'm gonna select noise reduction. In here I will...
Do I do that after? Okay, we might just... Hold on. Hello, hello, 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello, 1, 2, 3.
Hello, hello, 1, 2, 3.
It's still fucking there. I don't know what's making the noise. I'm going fucking insane. Is it in my YouTube version? This guy's 20 minutes. We don't have 20 minutes to fucking sit here and try to figure out.
You're here because background noise is... First tip, you can use the free version. You're going to have the tools we need. So check out this first clip. Sometimes dealing with a little background noise in here and adjust your attack, hold, and release if you want. Background noise. Let's go ahead and roll the clip. Sometimes there are some noises like this air conditioner that I want to completely remove from the background. And we can do that in DaVinci Resolve. I'm going to show you how to do it using this clip here. But then other times we may want to keep a little bit of that. Need Studio to do it. But I'll tell you, I mean, if you guys don't have Studio yet, if you can save up that $295.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna check my YouTube version. If it's there, if it's not there, I'll probably just start recording. It happens when I start recording Studio. It's not in my YouTube version. Okay, hold on. I'm trying not to spend too much time on this because we might just have to say fuck it. But the problem is it's also interfering with my... Mixer. Okay, open Mixer. Well, can I just like start recording without 1, 2, 3, 1, 2 without arming? Fuck. Hello, 1, 2, 3. Hello, 1, 2, 3. Oh shit. Okay, we might just try to figure out how to... Seems like there are effects. Wait, is this better? Hello? Fuck, it is making noise though. I don't understand. Hello? Hello? I don't understand. I'm going insane. Okay, maybe it's because this one's left and right, so Okay. I don't want to fucking add on. I just want to. Okay. What restoration? I don't. There's no. No one's telling me actually where to go. They're just saying use the restoration. I need you to. I'm very particular with my instructions. I need you to actually be specific. Effects. Maybe if I just turn you down. No. Hello, hello, 1, 2, 3. But the problem is, hello. The problem then is. Am I just blocked unless I can like throw a blanket over my mic? Well, a blanket over my mic help, or will it just muffle me? Let me go get a towel. So I know usually when you do this, what you do is you can be under the blanket with the mic, but I'm not sure if I want to do that. It's really taking a lot of time. So let's try this. It might be too muffled. We'll see what happens. Hello, hello. Okay. I think this did actually kind of help solve it. We'll push you back up. Okay. Well, I mean, it's better. It's quieter. So it is. I do just need better sound quality. My sound quality, I mean, like, my Achilles heel, man. Hello, hello, 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Hello, hello, 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Okay. It's not much better, but hopefully it's quiet enough that we can edit it out in post. Hello, hello. 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 Or was it just a fucking? Wait a minute. Was it just whatever that shit was? Bus 1? Oh my god, bro. It might have just been bus 1. Okay. I think we got it. So let's just take a moment before I start really getting into it. We got it. I think everything's all right. YouTube or Twitch may be lacking audio. I have no way of knowing. I'll speak strongly from the chest, and we will begin in a couple seconds. What's hidden in the hot suit? Episode 1. Nen. Spoilers for Hunter x Hunter up to the latest chapter, Chapter 410, as well as spoilers for the 2011 and 1999 anime. If you don't want to be spoiled, you can come back to this reading later. I should put this in the description. Okay, one last thing. So I am going to put this in the article because I'm not going to be okay. So there are pictures in this article, but that's mostly there just to prove that I'm not bullshitting you and that I'm actually like referring to actual chapters and shit. And also to Empire took out his amazing art. So in this audio version, I'm just going to kind of like scroll over the pictures. If I'm really feeling it, we might go over some of the Magic the Gathering Planeswalkers guide to stuff later, but that's probably going to be for tomorrow. So this is probably going to take like, I was reading this last night, it took like an hour. It's fucking insane. I was kind of a little bit insane. So, okay, this time we really start. Finally, we really start. Okay? Okay. Spoilers for Hunter X I'll stop pronouncing it Hunter x Hunter because I think it's the official pronunciation. I usually pronounce it Hunter X Hunter, but I don't know. For such like a long essay, it feels right to call it Hunter x Hunter. Spoilers for Hunter x Hunter up to the latest chapter, Chapter 410, as well as spoilers for the 2011 and 1999 anime. If you don't want to be spoiled, you can come back to this reading later. This version of the article that you're reading is actually the second version, as pointed out by several people on Reddit. In the original article, I conflated the terminologies of Hatsu and Nen abilities at several points. Hopefully, with this article, I can clear that up. As mentioned before, I do plan on making a video / audio version of this article at some point. This what you're listening to right now is probably going to end up being the audio version. I don't know why I said that so quickly because I'm trying to make it so it's easy to edit. But so your intro. So you're probably wondering what's up with the title, since I'm probably not going to go in depth about any one specific ability in this article. Well, this episode was originally going to be about Kurapika and his Nen abilities, how they work and how they metaphorically represent the character, because the way Togashi uses Nen and their respective abilities that can come with it to tell us about the characters who use them, their personality, and their place in the story is actually done a lot and very well. But I realized when I started writing the Kurapika article, I sounded completely incoherent. Plus, I kept having to repeat certain ideas or concepts over and over, which left me wondering how much time I would be wasting explaining information or my thought process on each article. So, like with my MTG Color Pie articles, which I am still working on by the way, in addition to the TMA article on the web, I decided to make a general video explaining some of the overall and commonly occurring concepts and distinctions, as well as some common misconceptions before having future articles focused on more individual people or things. Nen has a lot of misconceptions and speculation that are mistaken for fact. I also have my own speculations or assumptions about Nen, but I will try to be clear about when something is conjecture and give the reasoning and or sources. Another thing I noticed is a lot of Nen explanation videos leave me wanting. There are some good ones out there, like one by Nen World Review, but a lot of them lack some serious information. Don't talk about the symbolism, don't have as many sources, and just don't dive into the nitty-gritty as much as I would personally like. Now, will my article cover everything? No. Partially because of the fact that we are still being told new stuff about Nen as the story of Hunter x Hunter continues, and partially for the sake of time and to avoid confusion. We'll also focus on just Nen and not really how it's handled in society, so things like how the Hunters Association tries to keep it secret, and the bylaws regarding Nen are for another time. Aura itself. I know a ton of people are probably here to hear about the various Nen categories, but I want to try to start more generally before working my way down to more specific things. Cards on the table, yes, I will be using the Hunter x Hunter fandom Wikipedia to point me in the right direction, but I will also look for the exact chapters the information is mentioned, and I will try to include them as references for you guys. So Nen, what is it? Some of you probably already have an answer. Nen is a life force used as fuel for the super cool Nen abilities and magic system of Hunter x Hunter. This is technically incorrect if you want to be pedantic about the official terminology. According to Wing in Chapter 47, the term Nen actually refers to a technique / martial art that allows one to manipulate the aura that comes out of their body. So what's being used to fuel all the supernatural abilities is aura, but how this aura is actually controlled and utilized is through Nen. This is also why the term ordinary person, non-user, and non-Nen user exists. Technically, everyone has aura, as it is literally life force, because if you didn't have aura, you would just die. However, not everyone can use Nen to harness this aura, and that's where distinctions begin to occur. As I just mentioned, every living thing has aura and by extension the potential to use Nen. Because aura is a life energy produced by all living beings, including animals, aura exits the body from various points known as aura nodes. Normally, aura is completely invisible, even if certain effects such as malicious intent can be felt, or certain Hatsu, Nen abilities, and supernatural effects can sometimes be seen by anyone, including non-users, especially when using conjuration abilities to create tangible objects. By default, aura slowly leaks away from the body. The best way to visualize aura would be as something like a gaseous steam, which is kind of how it is represented in the anime and manga anyway. For most people, Nen uncontrollably leaks slowly out of the body by stepping off the top of their head, like a bit of steam leaking out of a teapot. By using Nen, especially 10, one can regulate their aura and keep it from leaking away. This comes with the benefit of also reducing the rate at which one ages, while greatly increasing their base strength, making them stronger than non-users by default, and this layer of aura acts as a layer of protection against the Nen / aura of others. While Nen is normally invisible, it becomes visible to people once they open the aura nodes in their eyes, allowing them to see it. The same rule about being able to actually see Nen appears to apply to video recordings of it too. As seen in Chapter 56, when Wing and his students review the video of Hisoka's fight with Castro by using Gil to see the aura hidden by Hisoka's In. What In and Gil are is something I'll explain later, but just know that this shows Nen in videos and probably pictures seem to abide by the same rules of visibility as using Nen in person. There are two main ways to learn Nen. The first way is the most common and safest, and that is through simple practice and proper meditation. However, this is by far the slowest way to learn Nen. Zushi, who is a natural prodigy, is said to have taken 6 months to learn the basic techniques of Ten, as stated by Wing in Chapter 48. This is considered fast, by the way. Most people take at least a year to learn the proper basics of Nen. According to Salkov in Chapter 402, it took him an entire year to get to the level of using Zetsu while multitasking when doing something like running and playing a game despite having been able to use the technique from birth. However, if you are in a bit of a time crunch, there is a second way to learn how to use Nen, but this can be extremely dangerous and is not recommended, so much so that most consider it taboo. This method is dubbed initiation or baptism depending on the specific translation you are using, and it involves forcing the nodes of one or more people open with a sudden influx of external aura. We have seen this happen both intentionally and by accident. Wing famously intentionally gives Killua and Gon a burst of Nen to force the aura nodes open in Chapter 48. We also see Gon and maybe Killua accidentally initiate the Chimera Ant Ramot after the latter managed to survive a blow from one of Killua's Thunderbolts and Gon's Jajunkan Rock attacks before being whisked away by Colt in the events of Chapter 191 and Chapter 194. As mentioned previously, initiation is considered extremely dangerous, and intentionally using it to teach someone Nen is frowned upon and considered taboo. According to Wing in Chapter 48, the reason for this is because anyone who had malicious intent or simply lacked the right amount of experience could potentially just kill or maim the person they are trying to initiate accidentally or purposefully. And we have encountered people who have lost entire limbs or become crippled due to the effects of a Nen attack, less initiation. Guido, Sadaso, and Ryavolt specifically. So we know it's very, very possible and easy to become permanently/seriously injured, crippled, or mutilated from an improper initiation. In Heaven's Arena, Nen using participants of the arena will typically practice initiating those who can't use Nen once they reach the 200th floor, often leading to serious injury or death to those that cannot already use Nen. However, that's not where the risks actually end for this method. On top of all this, once your aura nodes are awakened, or I guess I should say open. Once your aura nodes are opened, let me redo that. However, that's not where the risks actually end for this method. On top of all this, once your aura nodes are open, you don't really know how to control your aura flow, and you need to quickly learn to invoke 10, or else your aura will just pour your body from every open aura node. And since aura is your life energy, if too much of it escapes, you'll become so tired you can't even stand up, according to Wing in Chapter 48. It should be noted that while initiation is referred to as an attack, not all forms of initiation take the form of such. The one Wing provides Gon and Killua is noted to use a much more gentle aura when compared to the likes of Illumi's Nen. We also know even support abilities can act as a form of initiation. For example, Kurapika's Stealth Dolphin causes the non-users who are alone the inability to be initiated. The term attack tends to be used universally as a way to discourage its use, as Kurapika explains in Chapter 388. Kurapika even clarifies that initiation can be achieved through the use of healing or support abilities, not just literal attacks. And we see other characters such as Babiminya, and we see other characters such as Babiminya and Furikob speculating about the use of manipulation to force aura nodes open. However, they also note that in those cases, Nen users would normally be able to see or detect the aura the manipulator in question has infused into the initiate. Kurapika's Stealth Dolphin seems like quite an interesting form of initiation, since after Queen Oito was temporarily given a Nen ability by the technique, she later asked Kurapika to teach her Nen, but Kurapika reveals that she was already awakened to it without even realizing it, as seen in Chapter 369. Something that seems a lot less likely to happen if you got initiated from Gon socking you in the stomach or something. This could imply more subtle forms of initiation, or just Oito and Kurapika being more talented, but I'm going to leave any potential specifics regarding it to Kurapika or Oito's respective articles because I want to stay on track here. I'm not sure if this really counts as its own category of Nen Awakening, but I decided to cover it in its own little subcategory because I find it distinct enough. Within the Hunter x Hunter world, there are also people known as Nen Geniuses. a term that refers to people who subconsciously control the aura, master techniques, create Nen abilities, or use certain forms of Nen even if they lack formal or conscious training and knowledge. Wing says that in Chapter 48, people that can use Nen, including these geniuses, are often regarded as superhuman, geniuses, gifted, etc. I should also state that Theta refers to Zeratic as a genius, which would also imply that if you're good enough with aura and just are just so natural with it that you just understand it like intuitively, then that also seems to encompass the term genius. So genius can also refer to prodigy. Well, I guess it's more accurate to say that genius is just like prodigy. So it can be someone who's a prodigy, someone who knows then who's a prodigy, or someone who doesn't, who basically stumbles upon it because they're just that good with it. While it would be easy to just come to the conclusion that there are only two states of being when it comes to being able to use Nen, those who are Nen users and those who aren't, it's pretty apparent that this state of awakening exists on more of a spectrum. There are those who can and can't use Nen, but there exist states in between these that are referred to with terms like half awakening or semi-awakening, in which some of the users' aura nodes are opened properly, but not all of them. This can lead to people who have some control over their aura, unique Nen abilities, or have a higher amount of aura to pull from than the average person, but they are unable to see or sense aura in the same way that someone who is fully awakened to Nen would be able to. We see an example of this in Chapter 372 from two Hulkenberg's bodyguards. That ended up being in a state of half awakening due to this effect of the Ninth Prince's Nen beast. They had a lot more aura than normal, so they were mistaken for Nen users, but they did not seem to know how to control the aura in the same way someone who went through the proper training would. They also still had the secret system of aura flowing off from the top of their head that non-users tend to have. However, they seemed like they were able to learn Nen and how to manipulate the aura much faster than normal, probably because they were already part of the way there thanks to the semi-awakening. It is mentioned in moments throughout the story that certain forms of manipulation can be used to fully or partially awaken someone to Nen by forcing aura nodes open or closed for whatever reason, but we'll try to save more of that talk when we go over the Nen categories. Also, according to Long Yi in Chapter 401, if a baby becomes awakened to Nen in some way, such as by a psycho dad putting a curse on them from the moment of their birth, they will instinctively and naturally learn Ten and Zetsu as a way to reduce fatigue. As mentioned previously, all living things have aura, which means all living things have the hypothetical potential to use Nen. The clearest example of this would actually be the chimera ant mint Yuppie, Yuppie for short, who despite his humanoid appearance and mannerisms is stated to be made without a single drop of human genetic material, as we see mentioned in Chapter 266. As explained by Wing in Chapter 56, Nen tends to be heavily connected to the practitioner's own character, so just attempting to copy the abilities of someone else would not always reach the same results or level of efficiency, even if there would be specific instances where someone could reach such a goal. Aura can also convey emotion and intent, as we have seen on several occasions. One of the most notable ways this is done is by imbuing it with malicious or hostile intent to create a palpable force that can actually seriously harm those that cannot use Nen or those without proper protection, such as Ten, in a physical and or mental sense. It is stated by Wing in Chapter 48 to have been physically painful for Gon and Killua to endure hostile intent without Ten. We have also seen people like Killua describe Wing's Nen as a lot less malicious and more gentle compared to someone like Illumi. Due to how strongly aura is tied to Nen, one's aura output or Nen capability can spike or change in response to strong emotion, but this can come with the risk of straining the user or other such drawbacks. Tying into Nen and aura's connection to emotion, there is post-mortem Nen. Despite being powered by life force, some Nen abilities or effects can actually become stronger upon the death of the user. The most common reason for this happening is because of a powerful emotion, like a powerful grudge being present in the user when they die, causing their aura to seek out the source of their hatred and cling to it, as explained by Finks in Chapter 120. Post-mortem abilities fueled by negative emotion and the death of the evoker tend to be extremely hard to remove. There are those known as exorcists who have the abilities and skills needed to remove Nen curses, but they are extremely far and few between, even more so when it comes to those capable of removing curses set by those who are now dead. Fink states that the number of those who can remove curses left by the dead can be counted on one hand, but the wiki states there are 10, and I still need to find a source for the wiki's claim. However, I was able to find more else saying that the Hunters Association has a grand total of 1 exorcist amongst their ranks in Chapter 325. So the point stands that Nen exorcists are extremely rare and hard to come by. Not all post-mortem abilities are necessarily malicious or only take the form of curses, though. The ZU family are aided by Misha Hao's post-mortem Nen ability, one which aids in the inconspicuous disposal of corpses from any victim killed by the ZU family, through the act of controlling the deceased body to make it seem like a murder didn't just occur in public before moving the body to a location where it can be disposed of safely, as seen in Chapter 392. So, postmortem abilities can take the form of blessings and or curses along with more neutral manifestations. Sometimes a user's death connects a condition or requirement for an ability to work in order to make it much more powerful or effective than it otherwise would be. As mentioned previously, aura is present in all living things, which means being able to use Nen and interact with aura allows for connections or attunement with nature and various living things. There is a common belief that good hunters are well liked by animals, most likely because of their connection to Nen and aura, and wild animals are implied to have a greater sensitivity to aura generally. Some people and animals can spontaneously learn Zetsu, and human babies who are initiated will instinctively learn and use Ten and Zetsu to keep their aura from leaking away. In chapter 186, Kite notices that Killua and Gon are using their skills with Nen to become one with nature and more in tune with it, and use their five senses to catch things a non-user would miss. This association with nature also makes sense when you consider that aura can be used to convey intent. So someone with Nen could probably have an easier time conveying when they are not upset or harboring no malicious intent to wild animals. Before we get to some of the more flashy Nen techniques and skills, I think it's important to cover Nen and its relation to genetics and even gender. It is implied that skill or potential with Nen can be passed down. The Zoldyck family all appear to be powerful Nen users, especially Killua and his father along with his grandfather. King and his son, Gon, are also both powerful Nen users, and Beyond is a top-tier Nen user like his father. Things like this could just be mere coincidence or the product of other factors, just training being passed down, but I would be extremely surprised if that is the case, even if it doesn't seem like being the descendant of a powerful Nen user guarantees you'll be a Nen god, and being the child of someone who doesn't know Nen doesn't seem like it automatically damns you to a fate of Nen mediocrity. There are certain aspects of Nen that seem innate, there's just one Nen type, but a lot of these factors are a mystery or can vary, such as when influenced by strong emotions. We see with characters like Gon and Killua that people can have the same amount of potential or skill, but excel at different aspects of Nen. For example, Gon is known to have more raw power and aura, but Killua more finesse and control with aura, as noted by characters like Bisky, who compares Gon to a diamond and Killua to a sapphire in chapter 139, using this metaphor to interpret how they are different personality-wise and excel at different things. In chapter 141, Bisky also states that Gon has better connection and recuperation, but Killua has better analysis and fundamentals. Potential, however, does not guarantee someone will become a powerful Nen user if they lack proper training or discipline. One can also have their Nen growth stunted by spending too much time training in the wrong Nen categories, for example, as we see with Castro in his fight against Ahsoka during chapter 54. However, despite the conclusion this could lead one to having, Nen and aura do not appear to be sexually dimorphic in any way, despite how certain characters may talk about it. For example, Kurapika notes that male enhancers are more likely to have combat-oriented abilities in chapter 388, and female enhancers are more likely to have supportive or healing abilities. But in chapter 386, the bodyguard Baba Minya confirms that Nen talent has nothing to do with sex, gender, or physical capability, in response to Kurapika going out of his way to teach a smaller-sized woman Nen first as a way to showcase this aspect of it. The best example of what Baba Minya is talking about would probably be characters like Bisky. Even in Bisky's smaller form, she was capable of overpowering a full-grown man. That might be like twice her size, just Benult in chapter 137, despite her smaller frame and stature. Her true form is much bigger, with an absurd amount of muscle, physical power, and strength granted to her by her training. So what gives? Well, Nen and aura are heavily connected to the mind, and sometimes things like certain restrictions or rules can occur in one's Nen based on their own biases, intuition, and or personality. Objectively, based on what we know, a female enhancer could be just as powerful as any male enhancer, for example, but the conditioning of society could affect their own personalities and biases. Sorry, I just had to burp real quick. I'm just taking a drink of water on doing that. I'm not used to talking for this long straight. If a woman is convinced she cannot ever overpower a man, or that women are naturally weaker but faster, then her Nen ability is more likely to reflect this, and vice versa for a man. But this is a pretty extreme example. More subtle examples would be things like occupation or culture. Things like combat are less likely to be seen as ladylike, and some cultures associate femininity or womanhood with support or domesticity, which would encourage more supportive or less conflict-oriented abilities. However, the opposite can be the case for men, with the clearest example being Prince Benjamin's private army being entirely made up of men, and men being more likely to be associated with the modern military, and thus put into environments where they are encouraged to make combat-oriented Nen abilities. So yes, it is at least implied that a woman could be just as physically strong as Uvagan or Netero using Nen, and it is only mental blocks, personality, reference, or biases that would prevent this from being the case, not inherent biological ones. So Nen, Aura, and Nen categories do not discriminate between genders nor operate with any kind of wheel of time as power system or logic amongst men and women. Although, despite what I said, if the comments about Netero being in its prime during the events of the Chimera Ant arc in chapter 202 are true, then age does seem to be a factor with Nen. And as you get up in years, you will pass your prime and become weaker in some ways. And it's possible Netero. It is possible Netero is just playing up his and it's possible Netero is playing up this decrease in strength in some ways, given some of his jokes during the chapter. Although, to me, this could potentially make sense since Aura has life energy, so it's possible that when you start getting really, really old, you have less life force. But this is just speculation on my part on why this might be the case. Okay, since we're going to another category, I'm just gonna take a little sippy sip while my dog barks in the background because no one's taking him out yet. Why didn't even go out? I just supposed to see my mom. My mom probably just came home. Basic Nen techniques. Current viewer. Basic Nen techniques. Okay, I think it's about everything I wanted to cover about Aura in general. If I missed anything, I'll probably just make a second video clarifying things or Q&A. I know that a lot of people are excited for the Nen categories so that they can assign themselves cool abilities and stuff, but like I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to go from the most general stuff to more specific and character-dependent things. So first, let's start with the basic Nen techniques and what are known as the four major principles: Ten, Zetsu, Ren, and Hatsu. The four major principles do have an order in which you're usually supposed to learn them, with Ten usually being the first, Zetsu the second, Ren the third, and Hatsu the fourth. So I will tackle them in that order. Once a person opens their aura nodes, the first technique they should learn is Ten, because it is the ability to shape your aura and the one that's used to keep your aura from leaking away from your body. It not only provides basic protection against the effects of other people's Nen and aura, but it also considerably slows the rate at which one ages and strengthens their body, since your life force is no longer leaking away. While 10 does provide some protection against Nen attacks, it is a very rudimentary and basic defense. It provides a lot less protection against physical attacks that are bolstered by aura, even if it does protect against aura imbued with malicious intent, more mundane physical attacks, and it is better than nothing. According to Wing in chapter 56, 10 is like riding a bike, in that once you learn how to do it, you will never forget. Zetsu is the next technique to learn, and it involves completely stopping the flow of aura from the body. This is different from 10, since 10 itself keeps one's aura from leaking away from their body, but Zetsu stops aura from exiting the body altogether. This makes the user a lot harder to detect because tracking them via Nen becomes a lot harder if there is no aura to follow, and it also makes the user a lot more sensitive to and aware of the aura of others because the user themselves is not surrounded by their own aura. This makes Zetsu pretty useful for tracking and hiding, allowing the user to better feel and sense the aura of others without the metaphysical barrier that is their own aura between them and the world around them. According to Wing, Zetsu also increases the rate at which you can recover from exhaustion because you are conserving aura and keeping all your life force in your body. However, before you start wondering why anyone would ever leave Zetsu, the technique comes with major downsides. First of all, since there is no aura surrounding you, the user becomes way more susceptible to attacks, and you are leaving yourself completely defenseless to attacks as well as the aura and Nen of others. Even just malevolent intent or a weak attack can prove devastating, as displayed with how Wing and Killua react to Gon's invocation of the technique in chapter 50. While the use of Zetsu boosts your ability to sense the aura of others, the technique itself involves closing all the aura nodes across your body, including the ones in your eyes. The fact that does leave you unable to actually see aura, even if you can better detect it or use your other senses. So Zetsu is definitely a high risk, high reward type of ability to use. Next is Ren. Ren is all about outputting a larger amount of aura than with normal 10, and then projecting it outwards. This comes with the benefit of increasing the user's physical strength and durability more than 10 otherwise would, and provides a larger pool of aura to draw upon for various ability techniques. While all Nen abilities in Kokatsu, some Nen abilities can only be used while incorporating some form of Ren because of how much aura they draw upon. If one were to simplify things by considering 10 a defensive technique, then Ren could be considered its offensive counterpart. However, I consider this to be an oversimplification because the defense provided by Ren is actually greater than that provided by Ten. Personally, I would say it's more accurate to consider Ten a more passive version of Ren and Ren a more active version of Ten, instead comparing running to walking, but maybe that isn't as helpful. Throughout the article so far, I have mentioned the idea of infusing aura with bloodlust or using aura to protect bloodlust in a manner that can physically and psychologically harm others. This is where Ren comes in, since that effect is usually created when you combine feelings or intentions of hostility with bloodlust and Ren. This can produce uncontrollable dread, paralysis. Right? I think that was a mistake. This is where Ren can come in, since that effect usually created when combined feelings or intense intentions of hostility with Ren. This can produce uncontrollable dread, paralysis, and presumably even death without the protection of something like Ten. Neutral Ren is rarely felt by those incapable of using Nen. But malicious Ren can very easily be felt and affect such non-users, especially those the emotions are aimed at. Ren is also often used as a show of power and or to intimidate other Nen users by showing off your raw strength. Ren can also unconsciously reflect hostility without the user intending to do so, and it can leave faint traces of aura or evidence in the environment, even after an end user has left the area, which is implied to be possible by Silva in Chapter 98 when he points out that Kroll is skilled enough to not leave any traces of his aura behind while hiding. The downside of Ren is that it expends a lot more aura and stamina than the likes of Ten or Zetsu, and Ten seems like it can be maintained basically indefinitely, which does not seem to hold true for Nen users in regards to Ren because of the fact that it takes actual effort to maintain. It is possible to increase the duration of your Ren with practice and by extension the amount of aura you have at your disposal when using Ren. According to Bisky in Chapter 201, it takes usually 1 month to extend the use of one's Ren outside combat by 10 minutes. 1 month of practice, I should clarify, not just like 1 month of just vibing. This would also imply that combat or other intensive situations can lead to Ren lasting for less time or burning out quicker. This would also imply that combat or other intensive situations can lead to Ren lasting for less time or burning out quicker. Training with Ren seems to involve just trying to maintain your Ren for as long as possible, like a kind of exercise. In Chapter 57, Gon and Killua figure out that if timed correctly, you can use Ten to capture some of the extra ore made with Ren by using Ren to create a burst of ore and then perfectly timing Ten to capture the extra ore generated from the boosted flow. Although, this is up here. Although I have to assume this version probably would generate less aura to use overall, even if it probably is probably easier than maintaining Ren constantly. Finally, there's the most exciting and talking about Nen technique amongst Hunter fans, Hatsu. Now, I will be discussing Hatsu in a broad sense as opposed to any specific abilities or Nen types. Hatsu is described by Wing in Chapter 60 as being one's personal expression of Nen, and to be the act of projecting one's aura to carry out a specific function in the form of a paranormal ability. One's Hatsu and their Nen qualities are influenced but not restricted to the Nen user's own natural Nen category, with Nen categories determining how strong or effective certain Nen types and kinds of Nen abilities you use can be. The term Nen ability refers to a specific application of Hatsu to create a unique effect that cannot always be cleanly ascribed to any of the basic or advanced Nen techniques, even if they can involve their use or invocation. There are 6 Nen categories: enhancement, transmutation, conjuration, specialization, manipulation, and emission. And one's natural Nen category can be discovered by using Ren during a water divination test, which seems to be considered an application and practicing of Hatsu in and of itself. You cannot choose your Nen type, but you can become more skillful in using one or more Nen categories with the right exercise and training. Once you reach a certain level, then you have the skill to create an effective and useful Nen ability. Also, yes, your Nen ability can involve the use of more than one Nen type and thus fall under multiple Nen categories at once. Nen techniques can vary wildly. Some are so intricate and unique they can't really be as clearly described to any of the 4 fundamental techniques, or advanced ones at a glance. Others are so baby simple that they are basically just enhanced using a co-infused punch, stapling a restriction to it, like only being able to use your right hand or having to chant something, and then giving it a name. Ubogen! Big Bang Impact. Shit does go hard though. I think people overcomplicate the idea of Nen abilities in their head within the Hunter x Hunter fan base and convince themselves that all abilities have to reach some level of complexity or uniqueness, when in truth it doesn't always take much to make a Nen ability. Sometimes it's as simple as slapping condition or restriction on a basic or general Nen technique, and boom, Nen ability. I also have to imagine that what is considered a complete ability can vary from user to user, due to variance in personality and what they want their actual ability to be and do. According to Wing in Chapter 56, it tends to be best for someone to make their own Nen ability, as one can never truly master Nen if all they do is copy techniques. Even people who steal or borrow Nen techniques have a specific, more unique ability that allows them to do that, such as Corel's Branded Secret. Having the same technique is fine and all, and we have seen characters with the exact same Nen abilities, such as the ability Yomotsu Higui, we who were born at a convenience amongst the have-nots of the calculated population, and Second Prince Camilla's Guard. But not only do you have to consider your affinity for each Nen type, but it's vitally important that the Hatsu in question feels right and intuitive to the user themselves. Gut feeling and instinct apparently form a very important part in developing an ability with Hatsu. In Chapter 60, Wing's Hatsu training just seems to involve performing the water divination test repeatedly so that you can find your Nen type before performing the test over and over. The result of the test will become more pronounced the more aura you can muster with Ren during the test, and the goal is to produce more extreme results. I feel like I messed up with the formatting. For example, when Killua first does the test, the water tastes a little sweet, but after some practice, it tastes as sweet as honey. I assume part of the reason for this training is to practice mustering the forward to actually perform potentially more aura-intensive Hatsu and Nen abilities. As mentioned earlier, this is actually an updated article, since in the original article, I completed Nen abilities of Hatsu. Thanks to Reddit users like user Mango Turtle, user Flat Caterpillar, and user Super Metazoid, who corrected me. Yeah, shout out to Reddit users like user Mango Turtle, user Flat Caterpillar, and user Metazoid. To avoid any further confusion, I'll do some extra effort and explain the difference here. So all Nen abilities are applications of Hatsu, but not all Hatsu are Nen abilities. Hatsu more so seems to refer to the use and application of Nen types and qualities, which in turn lets you create your Nen abilities. So if you're a transmuter like Killua, Hatsu is referring to your ability to invoke transmutation in order to transmute your aura and or perform the water divination. And you can use this ability to create a Nen ability by virtue of using transmutation. While Nen abilities tend to be more unique, not all applications of Hatsu are as such. For example, the water divination test produces very specific results for each Nen category unless you're a specialist. In Chapter 200, we see Palm accidentally invoke Hatsu and presumably Ren, since the effect matches that of the water divination, to cause a cup of coffee to overflow, even though none of her actual Nen abilities seem to have any similar effect. Gon is able to identify her as an answer to this invocation of Hatsu. So while Palm is not using a Nen ability, she's invoking enhancement to generate this effect. So basically, all Nen abilities fall under the Hatsu classification, and not all Hatsu are Nen abilities. The important thing here is I don't need to change the name of the series. Should be fine. Take a small break because we just got to advanced techniques. Well, I'm actually making more faster progress than I thought it would. I'm afraid that, part of me is afraid this is going to last like 12 o'clock, like a.m. I don't know, I feel like I'll go insane before that. If that's the case, we'll probably just break it into 2 parts. I mean, I don't want to break it into 2 parts. It's so much work, bro. Just want to get it over with. And then tomorrow I can talk about Magic the Gathering or something while I edit this. Advanced Nen techniques. Okay, we'll touch on Hatsu Nen abilities again when we cover the various Nen types, but first, I think it's important to learn about the advanced Nen techniques as well. It is important to consider these and how they may inspire or interact with each other. Various Nen abilities, or the 4 basic techniques in general. Also, Wing teaches Zushi, Gon, and Killua some of these techniques before they get around to developing their abilities, despite explaining the concept of Nen abilities first. So I feel like it makes sense to explain these before Nen types, so we can avoid doing an awkward U-turn later. Has my mic not been plugged in like this whole time? Hello, hello? Hello? Hello, hello? Hello? Hello, hello? Hello? What's going on? Oh my god. I'm gonna be so mad if that fucked up all my audio, bro. Hello, hello? Hello? Oh shit. I hope my audio doesn't sound like ass in the post because of that. Fuck. Oh, fuck me. Okay. We'll just have to keep going. Did DaVinci Resolve report anything? It has been reporting, but I just don't know what's been reporting. Okay, fuck. Oh shit. Alright. Well, just keep on trucking, I guess. I might need to re-record some of this. Fuck me. Okay, we'll touch on Hatsu Nen abilities again when we cover the various Nen types. But first, I think it's important to learn about the advanced Nen techniques as well, since it is important to consider these and how they may inspire or interact with each other. Various Nen abilities, or the 4 basic Nen techniques in general. Also, Wing teaches Zushi, Gon, and Killua some of these techniques before they get around to developing their abilities, despite explaining the concept of Nen abilities first. So I feel like it makes sense to explain these before Nen types, so we can avoid doing an awkward U-turn later. It seems like every advanced Nen technique is a variation or specific application of the basic Nen techniques, and or some combination of 2 or more. First, we have Gyo, which Wing introduced in Chapter 6. A useful technique that is an advanced application of Ren, in which the user concentrates a larger than normal portion of aura flow to one specific body part. This has the benefit of increasing the strength and defense of that body part at the cost of leaving the rest of the body more vulnerable due to aura being taken away from them to maintain the Gyo in said body part. Most interestingly, when Gyo is used on the eyes, it boosts their efficiency and allows the user to see aura and then constructs concealed with techniques like in addition to traces of aura that would otherwise go undetected. As seen in Chapter 85 when it's used by Gon to identify aura-infused objects that couldn't be seen by him or others by the technique. One of the Chimera ants in Chapter 233 seems to describe Gyo as having a glowing effect when used on said body part, those who can see Nen. The Hunter x Hunter wiki states that there is an alternate version of Gyo that relies only on the aura naturally leaking from the body to function instead of Ren. But I'm having trouble finding a canon source for this, so if you know the chapter was to explain, if at all, feel free to tell me. What the wiki could be referring to is when Gon uses Gyo in Chapter 85, despite lacking the usual visual indicator or Ren effect around the eyes. But I'm not 100% sure. As you can imagine, while this version of Gyo does supposedly still increase the amount of aura and strengthen the affected body part, its effectiveness is lower than its more standard counterpart. It may not be as effective at countering techniques like In, but the wiki claims it can be used to see thin layers of aura and perform the aura divination test. Bisky's Gyo training, as first revealed in Chapter 136, involves Bisky randomly holding up her finger and shaping her aura into a number that is hidden by In. The student must be able to recognize what Bisky is doing and use Gyo to see and tell her what number is being made as fast as possible. In the case of Gon and Killua's training, the person that failed to do this or was just slower in doing the task than the other person had to do some sort of punishment, such as push-ups. In Heaven's Arena, I don't know why I said Heaven's Arena. In is an advanced form of Zetsu, as explained by Wing in Chapter 36, when he reviews Hisoka's Heaven's Arena battle against Castro. However, unlike Zetsu, it does not completely halt the flow of aura and stop it from spilling out of the body, but merely hides it to render it hard to perceive. It can cause all or parts of one's aura to become invisible, even to other non-users, making it useful for sneak attacks and laying traps, in addition to use in combination with non-constructs created via transmutation and/or conjuration, as seen with Hisoka and Kurapika when they use it on their transmuted and bungee gum in Chapter 56 and Conjure Chained in Chapter 82, respectively. Fuck. I think I've heard this is not going well. It seems like every advanced Nen technique is a variation or a specific application of the basic Nen techniques and or combination of two or more. I'm just gonna have to edit that back. Whoops, this is gonna be a lot of. This is gonna be pain in the ass, bro. We see Uboken, an enhancer used in to deliver a sneak attack on Kurapika. It does not make aura completely undetectable because of the fact that hidden aura can still be rendered visible to a non user using Gyo on their eyes, and the use of Zetsu can make one sensitive enough to aura to detect aura concealed within, even if this maneuver is more dangerous than using Gyo, as explained by Wing in Chapter 56. Also, if you're an expensive enough Nen user, sometimes you can just put 2 and 2 together. For example, if there's little to no aura being felt coming off someone in the heat of an intense battle that should require burning a bunch of aura, you can probably surmise they're using something like In to conceal some or all of their aura, and then it's still use Gyo or Zetsu to counter it. N is an N, not in, N, E-N, is an advanced application of both Ten and Ren, as explained in Chapter 94 when Nobunaga uses it. Usually with Ren and Ten, the aura only takes up a small space within a few centimeters around the user's body, but N allows one to extend the reach of their aura beyond that of what is normal for them by using Ren to generate more aura than normal, and then Ten to shape and mold that more flexible aura. Most N uses typically molded into the shape of a spear, although characters like Neferpitou are known to have irregular shaped N. P2's N in particular is described as resembling tendrils that could extend up to 2 kilometers or 1.24 miles, as more observed in Chapter 259. So it certainly is possible to produce more irregular shaped and less circular N. N is most useful as a means of detection, since it allows the user to feel the shape and movement of anything within the area covered by their aura. How well and detailed the information conveyed by this technique is dependent on the skill level of the user. This technique can prove useful in sorting Nen users from regular people, since Nen users are more likely to notice and react to the wider reaching aura. It's not explicitly stated, but considering the technique involves Ren and given how Neferpitu's N seems to have negative effects on characters like Nav, I think we can safely assume that N can be imbued with malicious intent or hostility like normal Ren can. As you can glean from a technique that makes use of Ren, using N can be extremely tiring because of how much aura it drains. N does not seem to have a concrete definition in the world of Hunter x Hunter, as Chapter 237 tells us that the minimum distance that aura needs to be stretched for it to be considered a successful usage of N is one that has a radius greater than 2 meters or about 6.6 feet. That's held for longer than 1 minute. A radius is the distance from the center of a spear to its circumference/edge. This is just the minimum requirement for being able to use N. Some who master N can shape their aura into a circle with a 50-meter, 54-yard, 2-foot, 0.5-inch radius. But some people are capable of going even farther. Neferpitu's N could not only reach very far, but they could also maintain it for several days at a time. While Xeno Zoldyck gives his N a radius of 300 meters, or about 328.084 yards, as the assassin reveals in Chapter 89. Shu is an advanced application of Ten that allows users to shape their aura around an object and use that object as an extension of their body, as we see in Chapter 140. The coating of aura strengthens and protects the affected object in the same way it would one's body. It can be combined with techniques like Ko, as we see Bisky, Gon, and Killua use them in combination with rocks during Bisky's enhancement training in Chapter 145. In Chapter 140, Bisky had Gon and Killua learn and practice Shu by making them dig a straight tunnel from one area to another. This also required them to dig through mountains. During this exercise, they figured out that the key to succeeding was using Shu to envelop their aura and their shovels around it. This also required them to dig through mountains. During this exercise, they figured out that the key to succeeding was using Shu to develop their aura around their shovels, which strengthened the tools and made the digging process much easier. Ko is considered a combination of all 4 fundamental basic techniques, including Hatsu, along with Ten, Zetsu, Ren, in addition to the advanced technique Gyo, as explained by Bisky in chapter 141. Gyo is used to focus aura into a specific part of the body, before Ten is used to prevent it from scattering. Zetsu is then used to completely stop the flow of aura to all other parts of the body, further boosting the area where all the aura is concentrated, with Ren being used to generate even more aura for the area to use. As you can imagine, this ends up acting as a trade-off. One part of the body is made extremely powerful and well defended by aura, but leaves the rest of the body without the protection of aura. The role Hatsu plays in Ko is less clear, but it might be involved in doing something like the specific role Hatsu plays in Ko is less clear, but it might be involved in doing something similar to invoking Ren for the water divination test to generate results. Ko can be used defensively, technically, but it's more commonly used offensively since one wrong move means that any other unprotected part of your body can be hit and damaged by even a presumably weak net attack. If we assume the rules of Zetsu apply anyway. But even a slow-moving Ko seems very powerful, as Bisky demonstrates the Gon. According to Bisky, Ko can be made dozens of times more powerful when combined with the user's speed and strength. It is also implied that that major disparities in strength can lead to one Ko overpowering another, even if both the defender and attacker are using it properly. Ken is described as an advanced form of base 10 and Ren techniques, as explained by Bisky in chapter 141. It is a more defensive technique where the user maintains a state of Ren for a prolonged amount of time, and we can assume 10 is used to help shape the aura, but I couldn't tell you for certain if the only qualification for being considered Ken is just being able to maintain Ren for a certain amount of time, as opposed to in burst, for the sake of aura protection and defense. The amount of aura surrounding the user is said to be approximately 10 times higher than when they are just using basic 10. Given this higher output, it only makes sense that Ken takes even more effort to maintain and can be tiring to keep up. Ken is more even than Ko in terms of aura spread, and is bestly typically used as a defensive technique since it allows for a high level of protection than that of 10 from attacks or aura, but it is safer to maintain than Ko for prolonged amounts of time because it doesn't leave any part of the body completely undefended. And Bisky goes as far as to state that it is the best technique for defending against Ko because of its balanced defense across the body, even if it doesn't completely block all the damage a Ko attack inflicts. Ken is also helpful when a Nen user just wants to be cautious. Some Nen users can expand the radius of their Ken to produce a sort of miniature pseudo-N in order to better sense incoming attacks that they may otherwise miss or be unable to react to. Presumably Killa was doing this in chapter 237. And Gon also performs this against Knuckle in chapter 210. Apparently, some people just refer to Ken as Ren due to how similar they are, and I can see why. And Gon refers to the technique as Ren in chapter 141 during the training session. In chapter 141, Bisky has Gon and Killer practice Ken by having Bisky herself strike at them really slowly with Ko, and the students properly maintain their Ken as a form of defense. According to Bisky, in the same chapter, if a combatant can't hold their Ken for at least 30 minutes, then it is not worth considering as an option in combat. Ryu is when someone uses Gyo in a state of Ken to perform real-time defense and offense adjustments, as Bisky goes over in chapter 142. Ko dedicates 100% of one's aura to one body part for the sake of defense or offense, and Ken splits aura evenly across all parts of the body. So Ryu is used to redistribute aura according to any other percentage. For example, you could focus 70% of your aura into your right fist and leave 30% of it to protect everywhere else. This can be very helpful when it comes to damaging someone using Ken without leaving the attacker completely undefended outside of a single body part with Ko. However, as one can imagine, Ko is still stronger thanks to the greater risk and more aura being channeled to a single body part for use, since Ryu will still spreads out the aura. Ryu is described as difficult to master because it not only requires precise control over the flow of one's aura with enough accuracy, but you also need to be able to estimate the amount of aura being used by the opponent on the fly. You could perform the technique correctly and still get screwed over if you don't move the aura involved in Ryu fast enough. Too slow of an aura flow can also give away your moves. In chapter 142, after completing the Ken exercise by performing it successfully for 30 minutes, Bisky has Gon and Killer practice Ryu by doing slow motion sparring with each other. They spar while moving extremely so that the defender can practice allocating their aura properly across their body in response to an attack for the sake of defense, and the attacker can practice allocating their aura for attacks. This exercise is essentially to help participants get the timing down. Ideally, this exercise helps the student properly use and allocate their aura when using Ryu and split-second decisions. Ooh. Yeah, so it's looking like I'm plugging in to re-record. Some shit. Thank you, one person who's probably me. Now that we have some of the basic and advanced techniques out of the way, general orthodox Nen training. Now that we have some of the basic and advanced techniques out of the way, we might as well circle back to the orthodox Nen training and go into it with more detail. Ideally, since you know now what every basic and advanced technique is, you can understand what it does and why it's learned without me having to explain each concept individually repeatedly. Again, I'm going to be focusing on what we know about the standard or quote proper unquote Nen training that most people go through as opposed to initiation. Most information we get on some of the more standard Nen training practice procedures comes from the Kaki and Prince Radix training, as well as some of the training Kurapika has his class performed, even if it is a bit more focused on aura control in order to prepare the class for their initiation. So Kurapika's class isn't one-to-one by his own admission, and we can't rely on everything we see within it, but plenty of it seems to be true and have tangible benefits. As mentioned earlier, standard Nen training starts off with meditation exercises, as explained with the wing. In fact, when Nen is first introduced, Zushi and Wing use the idea of Nen of the Flame being just a type of meditation in chapter 46. In chapter 375, Bergier's comment about Nen implies that at least some of the broader public knows that a concept called Nen exists, but they just believe it to be a mental technique that allows for abnormal amounts of strength than would otherwise be possible for the practitioner, as opposed to anything that can control aura flow or allow for the creation of objects from seemingly thin air. I bring this up because it sort of ties in with some of Nen's beginner training. While it doesn't seem to be a requirement, sometimes in martial arts, Shingen Ryu Kung Fu is used as a precursor to actually learning Nen. In chapter 46, Wing tries to pass off the four basic techniques as simply being meditation exercises, with Ten being focusing on the mind, reflecting upon the self and determining a goal, Zetsu being to put into words, Ren being intensifying your action, and Hatsu being to put into action. Thanks to what I discussed in previous sections, we know that this is mostly a lie because these concepts actually refer to different techniques or controlling the flow of aura. However, the concepts of these meditation exercises have a kernel of truth to them, and by Wing's own admission in chapter 46, he didn't lie to them, and says that the Nen he told them about helps prepare the spirit. In chapter 51, Wing tells Killua and Gon that while Gon was not allowed to use actual Nen, they can practice Nen the Flame every day using these meditation principles in its place. And in chapter 52, Wing notes that Killua and Gon's control of their aura has gotten better, with improved smoother Ten, despite Gon and Killua honoring the word not using Nen for 1 month. So while some of these meditation concepts are ordinarily useless red herrings to lay people, it seems that they can produce actual results when it comes to learning to control your aura with Nen when applied to the proper learning process. Due to how strongly aura is linked to one's mental state and emotion, it seems like proper meditation can be used to get better at Nen without utilizing true Nen or aura manipulation. Although it's clear that this meditation isn't a permanent substitute to actually practicing real Nen with real aura, since Wing offers to allow Killua to do Nen exercises with him, and Zushi in chapter 51 after he barred Gon from using Nen for 2 months, and Gon and Killua do practice actual Nen again. When it comes to Nen, the point of starting off with meditation exercises is to allow students to gradually become aware of their aura flow before their nodes are open. We can assume that with this way you can avoid a situation that might occur with a sudden initiation, in which all your aura nodes are open, but you have no way to control your aura flow, so said aura just spills out and leaves the user exhausted. In Shingen Ryu martial art, the point of the 10 step is to help hone the mind, improve the flow of one's 10, as we can clearly see with Gon and Killua's training under Wing. However, since Gon and Killua were initiated and Zushi was already well along the process, we get some of the more standard Nen training practices later in the series. In chapter 370, Oito does a meditation exercise that involves the student closing their eyes, putting their index fingers slightly apart, and then moving tips of said fingers closer together until they feel like they're pushing against something. The point of this exercise is to gauge the student's natural talent and predisposition towards aura. The farther apart one's index fingers are from each other when they begin to feel the pushing sensation, the higher the talent for aura, and seemingly how long it will take for them to learn Nen. This can be seen in how Bill comments that Oido seems like the type of person who will probably take a lot of time to learn Nen after seeing how close her index fingers are when she feels the sensation. Another exercise we see is one meant to teach the basics of aura manipulation while allowing someone to learn to feel their own aura, even if the student still doesn't have the ability to actually see it. This stage appears in chapter 366 when Theta has Tsuradic put both hands in front of his chest and imagine a ball floating in between them as a way to practice aura control. Even though Tsuradic gets the hang of this in a few moments because of his incredible talent, Theta expects him to take 3 Theta expects him to take 3 10-minute sessions each day over the course of 10 days to get the hang of it, and she comments that if he's lucky, he'll get it in 5 to 7 days. This would imply that most people doing 3 10-minute sessions. This would imply that for most people doing 3 10-minute sessions, it would take them 10 days to pass this part of training, while more talented people can take 5 to 7 days, and outliers like Tsuradic can take even less time. In chapter 362, one of Prince Luzurus' guards tell him that on average it takes about 1 year for someone to gain the ability to see aura, but we know that more gifted individuals can learn Nen much faster. In chapter 368, Theta says that while the average person takes at least 1 year to learn Nen, it's possible for someone to learn it in half the time, so about 6 months. And in chapter 48, Zushi, whose wing states is a natural prodigy, apparently took 6 months to learn the basics of Nen. Oh, my throat, man. Ooh. I might need to get more water. Learning to open every single one of your aura nodes and being able to control your aura seems to take about 1 year after 3 hours of proper basic exercises every day, according to Furikop in chapter 38, after seeing Kurapika awaken one of the students in Nen. As I touched on previously, Ten seems like it's usually the first technique that is learned to keep one's aura from moving away. This is done by learning to contain one's aura around them little by little through meditation and breathing exercises, as Kurapika alludes to in chapter 388 when explaining Nen to one of his students. In chapter 56, after Gon and Killua get the hang of Ten, Wing seems to prioritize learning Ren and then Gyo, an advanced form of Ren, next as a way to be able to produce enough aura to utilize more advanced techniques and perform Hatsu. But part of the reason for this could be because Gon and Killua already displayed that they knew how to use Zetsu. Gyo seems useful for perceiving more residual aura or aura hidden by In and such. Hatsu training, as covered earlier, seems to involve doing the water divination test over and over while attempting to produce more extreme changes in the water and or leaf, which Wing has his students do in chapter 60. Kurapika also alludes to Hatsu training involving breathing exercise in chapter 388. In chapter 123, Wing tells Gon that he should practice his 10 Ren daily because they are the foundation for more advanced techniques. How much water do I have? I think after I read this part, I'm gonna go fill up my water bottle. This is doing a number on my throat. It's like probably the most I've ever read on like a live stream or something. And we are not quite halfway through. One of the most important aspects of aura and then okay, sorry. Slow down. Nen conditions, limitations, risks, activation requirements, etc. One of the most important aspects of aura and then Hunter x Hunter is that of limitations, risks, and vows. Since Nen is a product of the mind, personality, thoughts, and mental state of someone can all influence one's aura and Nen. I would argue that the line between a condition, limitation, risk, and activation requirement can be a bit blurred, nebulous, or even kind of synonymous sometimes. But the wiki goes over them individually, so I'll be the topic up into the same categories. For the sake of the wiki in this article, a condition is basically a trade-off that makes an ability stronger or potentially even possible in the first place. Unlike limitations and vows, it doesn't seem possible to break a condition normally. A limitation is a sort of Nen pact in the form of an additional cost or drawback to strengthen ability, while a vow refers to promising to uphold that pact. Activation requirements are the conditions an ability needs to meet in order to be used, and a risk is basically what it sounds like. The more of a risk you take when doing something, like leaving yourself open to an attack, or having to say a chant, the stronger the resulting Nen tends to be. When creating an ability, it's possible to include conditions. When creating an ability, it's possible to include conditions. Sometimes conditions are used to strengthen a technique or to compensate for lack of skill in some area. For example, in Chapter 108, Kurapika explains that he can only use a Judgment Chain while his eyes are scarlet. The reason for this is that the ability requires the use of emission and manipulation to maintain the chain at a distance and impose its rules. So ordinarily, Kurapika wouldn't have the force and accuracy needed to pull that off. But combining this condition with the effects of Emperor of Time grants a boost, right? Okay. The reason for this is that the ability requires the use of emission and manipulation to maintain the chain at a distance and impose its rules. So ordinarily, Kurapika wouldn't have the force and accuracy needed to pull that off, but combines condition with the effects of Emperor Time grants with the effects of grants a boost to the efficiency Kurapika has when using each Nen type, not his affinity for them, and allows him to use this ability. Conditions. Does this make any sense? Okay, the reason for it is that this ability requires it. The reason is that the ability requires the use of emission and manipulation to maintain the chain at a distance and impose its rules. So ordinarily, Kurapika wouldn't have the force and accuracy needed to pull that off. But combining this condition with the buffs Emperor Time grants boosts the efficiency Kurapika has when using each Nen type, but not his affinity for them, and allows him to use this ability. Conditions can also be used to exceed what would normally be possible to achieve without the trade-off. In Chapter 83, Izanagi tells Kurapika that it's impossible to make something like a completely unbreakable chain with conjuration, but something quite close can be conjured with the proper limitation, with proper conditions, limitations, and vows. Some conditions are more like active choices on the part of the user, and certain kinds of techniques actually need specific conditions to function at all. For example, in Chapter 379, Feng states that spatial teleportation abilities require something called marking, meaning someone cannot use Nen to teleport themselves somewhere they've never actually been to before. Some conditions are more like active choices on the part of the user, and certain kinds of techniques actually need specific conditions to function at all. For example, in Chapter 379, Feng states that spatial teleportation abilities require something called marking, meaning someone cannot use Nen to teleport themselves somewhere they've never actually been to themselves. In Chapter 50, Wing implies that manipulating an object usually or always requires a strong connection/relationship with said object, such as Gudo controlling his tops, even though Gudo is an enhancer. So there isn't someone who can use manipulation to go around controlling anything and everything without some sort of condition, limitation, or activation requirement, even if it's as simple as needing to touch an object or only being able to control certain things. Shalmark's experimentation with Green Island cards and objects in Chapter 134, using the abilities of Shizuki and Kortopi, seem to imply that conditions cannot be broken or ignored. This is different from limitations that can be broken but at a great cost or drawback. Despite what one may first assume, not all conditions and limitations are made via a conscious choice. Earlier I mentioned how some kinds of abilities just straight up require conditions to even work, but sometimes conditions can manifest naturally or based on what feels right to the user. For example, Chapter 76 reveals that like any other emitter, Franklin could just fire or projectiles out of his hands, fingers, and other such body parts. However, he cut off the tips of his fingers because he felt it would be more effective, and this self-imposed condition increased the power of his double machine gun ability. I just want to say the art Togashi does, like, holy shit, this is beautiful. I love this panel so much, it's beautiful. Anyway. Another even more passive example of a condition can be seen in the manipulation Hatsu ability. Order Stamp. Another even more passive example of a condition can be seen in the manipulation ability Order Stamp. Despite being stolen by Cruella, it is still bound by some of the original owners' personality and sense of right and wrong, as Cruella explains in Chapter 352. While Cruella doesn't see any difference between a human corpse and an inanimate object, such as a puppet, the original owner of the Hatsu did, and as such, Order Stamp does not work on human corpses, because they register as people instead of objects to the ability, although conjured copies of corpses count as valid inanimate targets. The original ability's creator also defined a puppet as a non-living object with a discernible head, So since something doesn't have a head, it cannot be affected by the Nen ability. And if a once eligible puppet loses its head, the ability will stop affecting it. Another common condition we see are abilities that require some sort of object or other medium to use. There's melody in her flute for her music. Hisoka needs a thin, plain surface. There's a piece of paper or napkin. It's explained in chapter 355. It's explained in chapter 55. Hisoka needs a thin, plain surface, such as a piece of paper or napkin, as explained in chapter 55, in order to use his sexual surprise. Illumi and his needles for the use of his manipulation. Shalnark and his phone, and the tenor for black voice, etc. Sometimes it's possible to use unbreakable conditions to your advantage, because it seems like many, if not all of them, are passively active even when the user themselves is unaware of something. For example, Shizuku's Blinky cannot stick up living objects and/or objects made with Nen, so it can be used to help detect traps or living survivors. And the vacuum seems to be bound by this condition, even if Shizuku herself is unaware that something didn't meet the ability's conditions, which Shalnark uses to his advantage when experimenting on Greed Island. Some conditions don't limit when a Hatsu can be active and what it targets, but rather actively draw back additional costs or just extra strain on the user. For example, Kurapika says in chapter 364 that for every second he has it for a time active, 1 hour should off his lifespan. Another type of restriction many abilities have is an activation requirement. This can be as simple as illuminating to stick at least one of his needles into someone, to having to explain your Nen ability to something much more complex. In chapter 253, Leol reveals that the Inamura Hatsu in chapter 253, Leol reveals that the Inamura ability he borrowed can only be used on rainy days. Some activation requirements only need to be met whenever you use the ability. However, some need to be constantly met with the duration of time the technique is being used. For example, the order stamp I mentioned earlier will cancel if the thing it is controlling loses its head despite being eligible as a puppet previously. As I touched on earlier, some activation requirements are common or needed for certain kinds of abilities to work at all. When Zeno and Silva are fighting Chrollo in chapter 98, Zeno notes that stealing abilities usually requires the one doing the stealing to meet 4 or 5 conditions and deduces that Chrollo is a specialist, once again pointing to the idea that it's a recurrent restriction amongst people with similar abilities. Sometimes it is possible to create or find loopholes to circumvent special Nen restrictions, or at least loosen them a little bit. For example, in order to use abilities stolen by Bandit Secret, Chrollo needs to have the book open to the page. This prevents Chrollo from using certain abilities that require the use of both hands, since one hand has to hold the book open, and it means Chrollo can't use any abilities while the book is closed. However, in chapter 351, Chrollo reveals the bookmark ability Double Face. This ability allows him to bookmark a page and use the ability on the marked page, so he can free up both his hands for an ability, or use 2 abilities at once if he has the book open to one page and bookmark on another. I should make it clear that there's definitely still limits to this, since Chrollo seems to have only one bookmark and cannot just use a countless number of abilities at once. Chrollo also manages to find some loopholes with Order Stamp. The original user's morals prevent Chrollo from just commanding the puppet to kill someone, but he can command them to break someone instead to get them to mortally wound targets. While Order Stamp cannot be used to control corpses, it can be used to control recreations/copies of corpses. The existence of loopholes like this sometimes leads the reader / watchers of the series trying to find ways to circumvent them or poke holes in the logic of this aspect of Nen. I remember seeing one comment trying to argue that Nen made no sense because you could do something along the lines of saying, my Nen ability will be a different color every time I use it, in order to dramatically boost its strength. But this argument is born from a massive misunderstanding of how restrictions like conditions, limitations, etc. work in Nen. First off, Nen is connected to willpower and intent. So if you purposely make a restriction that you know will not really matter, or you just plan to easily circumvent without any issue, then it will be less effective. Not to mention, as pointed out in chapter 83 by Izanagi, we know vows, limitations, conditions, etc. are stronger the more strict they are. Saying I can only use this ability every other day will yield a weaker result than saying if I use this ability at all, I will die. So if you just plan to create a restriction where you are picking from an infinite range of colors that have slight differences in their shade, the boost would be minimal to non-existent at best, given what we know. And the same would probably be true if you said something like, I can't use this ability in space, knowing damn well you aren't planning on going to space, and the chance of you just ending up there is impossible. According to Izanagi in chapter 83, the act of creating and having a rule you must abide by is known as a limitation, and the act of actually swearing to commit to said limitation is known as a vow. Unlike other conditions or activation requirements, which need to be met for the ability to even function seemingly, limitations can actually be broken at the risk of some sort of punishment, losing the capacity to use the Nen ability Evolve, or losing the ability to use Nen altogether. Adding additional catches, such as the loss of your life if you break a vow, can further empower Nen ability. So you might ask, why doesn't everyone walk around making a bunch of vows to boost their Nen? Well, first, as I mentioned, the vow becomes more powerful the more conviction you have behind it, and the more of a drawback it actually is. So to make it an effective vow, you need a good balance of making sure your Nen ability is actually usable for whatever its purpose is, while having a significant enough vow to actually give it the proper amount of strength it needs to get the job done. If a vow is too weak, there might just not be a point in having it, or you just limited your ability for no reason. If the vow is too restrictive, it might hinder you more than it helps. So it's a double-edged sword that needs a careful balance. In the case of Kurapika, his chain gel can only be used on Phantom Troop members, and using it on anybody who is not currently one of the troops members will cause Kurapika to just die. So this limitation allows for an incredibly strong chain that not even Uvogan, the strongest of the spiders, an enhancer who could tank direct fire from rockets and bullets, could break at it. According to Izanagi in Chapter 83, had Kurapika not added the stipulation that using his chain gel on anyone who's not a Phantom Troop, not a member of the Phantom Troop, would result in his death, and the ability would not have worked as Kurapika intended due to the lacking the proper training. It's also important to remember that chain gel has a pretty hefty limitation, since at the most spiders can have like 13 members. That's 13 safe targets out of the entire population at any given time, and that number has a chance to be less, especially if you're actively killing members of the troop. However, limitations can be weird, and they don't always guarantee that those using them can manage to get a big enough boost for the task at hand. Additionally, in Chapter 83, Izanagi said that exceeding 100% of one's normal capabilities comes with risk. Going past your natural limit always comes with drawbacks, and increasing one's strength usually comes at the cost of something else that can create weak points. Drawbacks or even fatal results. So most ninjas lean toward the more stable and consistent methods, and this is probably why something like Emperor Time drains Kurapika's lifespan. I would think of it like how pushing your body past the physical limit can strain it. Since aura and Nen are so heavily tied to emotion, mental state, and resolve and willpower, one's Nen strength can sometimes fluctuate in response to strong emotional states. As I mentioned earlier, self-imposed rules can actually increase the effectiveness of a Nen ability, such as the vow Kurapika makes for his chain gel. And in Chapter 254, Moro addresses the possibility of Dio using his earbuds to boost the effectiveness of his ability by increasing the risk of using his ability via cutting off his sense of hearing when he does it. As mentioned earlier, in places like Chapter 83, we see determination is also an important factor with risks and conditions. Basically, you have to actually mean it and be willing to follow through with it. Trying to trick your Nen into being more powerful or something isn't going to work. And determination is also partially what made Kurapika's chain gel so powerful. In Chapter 211, Knuckle postulates that part of what makes Golan's Jinkan so strong is the added risk in taking the chime to charge the attack while chanting the rock, paper, scissors, Junkan Pon, and Golan sacrificing his defensive power by focusing aura into his fist. While risks do help boost the power of abilities, it seems like conditions or limitations can boost the power of the ability even when there's little to no risk. For example, Gon taking extra time to charge his Junkan against Razor during the dodgeball match in Chapter 165 seems to cause a small spike in Gon's aura and power, as even other characters seem caught off guard by the strength of the aura, despite having already seen Gon's Jinkan rock before. Although, I guess you could argue that taking more time to charge the hot suit... I corrected all these. What? Is this like the... Although, I guess you'd argue that taking more time to charge the Nen ability at least gave Razor more time to react and prepare as an added risk, even if going on all the time in the world to sit there and charge his power due to the rules of the dodgeball game. As mentioned earlier, we've also seen some intense emotions increase or influence the power of Nen. An example of this would be when Moro asks Gon to attack him in Chapter 223. Thinking about Kai's death immediately, of course, leads to Gon having a massive influx of aura, and Gon apologizes before admitting that he really was determined to kill Moro in that moment, which is something that also could have influenced the attack's power. So before we get into the nunchucks, I know probably what most people are here for. I'm gonna go get some more water real quick because my throat really hurts, and I'm probably gonna have to do a lot of this. I'm probably reconsidering my life choices. I have to probably do a lot of editing here later. But I'm just gonna take it's not gonna take super long. It should take less than 5 minutes, and I'll come back and we'll get reading the Nen chart and Nen types. And hopefully after that, it should be smooth sailing before we well, I mean the Nen The other NEN classification thing was pretty long. But hopefully after that, it'll be kind of smooth sailing. I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm back. More water. Oh, let's go. I'm lucky to get this done before dinner. NEN chart. Now that's the last of the general techniques and information. So you might be asking, is it time? Oh yeah, buddy, it's fucking time. Everyone bust out your NEN charts and what NEN type of mind quizzes. If you're really feeling it, put your own NEN ability in the replies or something, IDK, because we are talking about the NEN types. I want to catch my breath for a sec. I should have. For the sake of clarity, I will be recycling the stuff I talked about previously, even if I keep it brief when possible, because there are actually a lot of misconceptions around NEN types. Before we get into the specifics of each type, let's start with the NEN chart. Okay, so as you know, there are 6 NEN types, and they are arranged on a chart in a sort of diamond-esque hexagonal shape. Starting from the top and moving in clockwise order, we have enhancement, transmutation, conjuration, specialization, manipulation, and emission. Everyone is born with a natural affinity for one NEN type. What this means is that everyone has a 100% affinity aptitude for one of the 6 NEN types. An 80% affinity for the ones right next to their category on either side, a 40% on the category furthest from them, and a 60% in the remaining 2 categories. So if I was a transmuter, I would have a 100% affinity for transmutation, 80% for enhancement and conjuration, 60% for emission, and 40% for manipulation. At this point, you're probably wondering why I didn't cover specialization, since one would assume a transmuter would have a 60% affinity for specialization because, like emission, it is 2 categories over from transmutation on the chart. Well, specialization is a unique NEN category that has its own rules, and lack thereof. So, a transmuter would have a whopping 0% affinity for specialization. Only a specialist can utilize specialization, and I'll explain the nuances of that in greater detail later. So, all these percentages are cool, but what do they actually mean for NEN users and the NEN chart? Well, according to Kurapika in Chapter 108, each of these percentages are rough approximations of how efficient a NEN user would be at utilizing any given type. It is possible to use abilities that do not fall under one's own NEN type, but generally it is best to try to stick to your own NEN type, or at least include said type somewhere in your abilities if it involves multiple types. As you can tell by all these percentages thrown around, the further a category is from your type, the less efficient it will be, meaning it will be less effective and weaker if you just stick to your own NEN category. Plus, learning techniques of NEN types that aren't the ones you have a natural affinity Plus, learning techniques of NEN types that aren't the one you have a natural affinity for will just take longer to learn. In Chapter 108, Kurapika translates affinity to levels as a metaphor that could potentially imply that some kinds of techniques require a certain level of affinity, force, and accuracy for the NEN type to even use, or at least be effective in a meaningful way. I haven't found anything really expanding on this outside the idea that techniques become less efficient the lower your affinity and mastery for NEN type is, in addition to Kurapika saying his chain tail doesn't work when his eyes aren't red. Trying to copy Kurapika's chains as an enhancer wouldn't make a lot of sense for most people because of the decrease in strength and the inefficiency of the technique. Not to mention that it would take longer to learn because the further away NEN category is from your own, the more time you would have to commit to mastering that category when compared to your own. A concept we see explored with Castro when explaining the problem with Castro spending so much time developing a complex conjuration and manipulation ability with his double despite being an enhancer. The best example of the nuances in NEN type would actually be thanks to Kurapika's specialist ability, Emperor Time. Once again, I'll go into specialization in detail later, but Kurapika is a special case in that he's a conjurer that becomes specialist when his eyes turn red. This gives him access to a special ability called Emperor Time. There are a lot of fans who think this gives Kurapika a 100% affinity for every type, but this is not actually what it does. As you can see above, what actually happens is he basically gains a perfect force and accuracy when using a mission, but in respects to being the affinity of. As you can see above, what actually happens is he basically gains a perfect force and accuracy when using a mission, but in respects to the affinity of being a conjurer. So we can use this as a convenient point of reference. If Kurapika uses Emperor Time, he gains a force and accuracy equal to that of a level 4 emitter, because, as a conjurer, Kurapika's affinity for a mission is 40%. However, a level 10 emitter, i.e. someone with 100% affinity in a mission, presumably in addition to the proper training, would still run circles around Kurapika's own mission capabilities, and potentially perform certain mission abilities that Kurapika couldn't, even if Kurapika could still outdo a novice enough emitter, someone who isn't good enough with the category, or someone who lacks a high enough affinity for a mission. However, the special Togashi Yoshihiro exhibition puzzle exhibited in Tokyo on October 28, 2020 to January 9, 2023 features a NEN chart with some interesting placements. The NEN chart would be as you expect in many ways. It's in the same order as always, with the hexagonal pattern. However, if you linger on it, you quickly notice that while plenty of characters sit directly on each category, some actually sit in between them to varying degrees. This might lead to one assuming that it's possible to have some sort of dual affinity or have a hybrid affinity split between two types, but this is not the case. Hold on, someone's calling me. Hello? 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 Well, hopefully no one picked up, so hopefully they'll get back to me. It is only possible to have one affinity at a time, and even characters who change affinities, like Kurapika, are only one or the other at a given time. I should also mention that only specialists, people can only become specialists later in life. It's not like any category, anybody could change to a category later. So an enhancer could not become a transmuter later in life, but anybody has the potential to seemingly become a specialist later in life due to various factors. What this chart is meant to show, according to my findings, is the idea that you can lean towards an adjacent affinity, but you're still stuck with whatever your natural category is. Let's take the butler Goto and our protagonist Gon, for example. Gon is a quote pure unquote enhancer, while Goto's enhancer to lean towards a mission. What this is displaying is the rates at which the characters learn to pick up a mission and enhancement techniques. Gon learns enhancement techniques as fast as you would expect, and presumably Goto would learn enhancement techniques quickly too. Goto would also learn emission techniques faster than Gon because of his own leaning. So a character that is smack dab in between these two categories, like Franklin, isn't someone who has 100% affinity in both, or 9% affinity in both, but rather 100% affinity in one and 80% affinity in the other, like always. Also, going back to the Gon and Goto example, it also means that Gon learns emission and transmutation at equal rates, while Goto would learn emission faster than he learns transmutation techniques. It's just the rate at which Franklin can learn and master emission and enhancement would be more even. Despite this, they still have a primary affinity that follows the rules of NEN chart placement. The character Bisky does actually make a reference to these leanings in canon, Hunter x Hunter. In chapter 148, Bisky estimates that Gon has a slight lean towards emission, since he seems to learn emission faster than transmutation, despite both of the subsequent categories being equal distance from enhancement itself. And she mentions that he's way better learning enhancement than emission. While not directly stated in the manga, as far as I remember, it does seem possible for these leanings to change, since Bisky believes Gon to have a lean towards emission. Since while not directly stated in the manga, as far as I remember, it does seem possible for these leanings to change, since while Bisky believes Gon to have a lean towards emission, Togashi places him as a pure enhancer. It's possible Bisky was just wrong, but since Gon went from skillful to extreme to then lost in that exhibition, there's the implication that how proficient one is with Nen can change. It's possible that Nen type leanings are something that can also change over time or under specific circumstances, even if Nen types themselves usually can. The puzzle is also divided. The skill level of each Nen user into 4 categories. From lowest to highest, it goes skillful, excellent, natural, and extreme. Gon is also given the level of Nen lost after the snipe pulled against Net for P2. Characters like Bisky and Netero are classified as extreme. For P2, Mentyupi, Shaifu, and Hisoka and Lumi as natural. Nob and Knuckle as excellent, and characters like Moral and Razor as skillful. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list of every character and where they play. It's just me trying to give you an idea of what each tier is like. There's no evidence that these are the only tiers of skill. I mean, Gon has Nen lost when no one else does, and Razor along with Moral definitely aren't pushovers, or the skill classification like and the skill classifications like these aren't so. There's no evidence that these are the only tiers of skill. I mean, Gon has Nen lost when no one else does, and Razor along with Moral definitely aren't pushovers, or that these skill classifications are necessarily used in universe. Imagine these are for the sake of the exhibitionism and our own convenience. It's only characters with enough presence in the story seem to be placed. Rest in peace, Weird Al Empire NPC actor. Togashi will answer for what he did to you. But what if you have a character that needs to figure out the natural Nen type? Are you just supposed to guess and see what feels good when you're trying to make your abilities? Well, this is where the water divination test comes in. There's also Hisoka's personality test, but the water divination seems like the most accurate test so far. The test involves getting a cup, filling it with water, and then putting a leaf on the water so it can float within it, as seen in chapter 60. You then put your hand around the glass, one on each side, but I don't believe we have ever seen someone touch the glass with their hands before using Ren, Yo, or any other technique that focuses enough ore into one's hands. This causes certain effects to occur, with each effect signaling the Nen type of whoever is taking the test. Although we do see Palm create an effect that matches the result of an enhancer, performing the divination in chapter 200 with a cup of coffee accidentally. Whether this means you could perform the divination with any liquid, specific substances, or water is just used to more easily determine the result, or something is unclear. If an enhancer performs this test, the volume of the water rises. Transmuters will cause the taste of the water to change. Emitters will cause the water to change color. Conjurers make impurities appear in the water. Manipulators cause the leaf on the water to move. If someone produces any kind of effect outside the specific ones listed, then they are a specialist. If it also seems like certain effects can hint at the personality of the user or what abilities they should or can develop, especially in the case of specialists, because their abilities could potentially be anything, and they don't always get to choose it. An example of what I mean regarding personality is that when 4th Kekian Prince Saradnik performs the water divination test, he causes the water to boil and release a putrid scent in chapter 376. That seemed to take even him aback. This means he's a specialist, and this particular result is noted as being a very sinister omen. I would go as far as to say that some of the results characters get when performing the water divination may have a bit of symbolism or metaphor to them. For example, Saradnik makes the water boil. The reason people boil water typically is to kill germs and disinfect the liquid itself, or anything within it, such as ingredients used in cooking. So you could see this as relating to Saradnik's goal to separate the supposed useful trash of the society from the useless trash and discard the latter. In essence, he wants to purify society in the same way boiling purifies water. However, the putrid scent gives a hint as to how malicious and destructive Saradnik actually is and how he views society, since we know he's a serial killer and Omega level sexist. As pointed out by Twitter user AOS86399742 on Twitter, It could also be a reference to the chapter of Revelations in the Bible, a chapter that includes a demon who falls to earth and poisons the water supply with his mere presence. As told in Revelations 8:10 through 8:11, the third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers. And in the springs of the water, the name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. Togashi is also no stranger to Christian iconography. I mean, there's a guy named Lucifer, and the Ten of Troop have a parallel to the 12 Apostles, with Ahsoka being an extra Judas traitor. Also, one of Strahdek's Nembeast literally has a 666 on its belt / stomach, so the comparison to Satan or demons is not unwarranted. There are some examples I could bring up and theorize about. For example, when Killua performs the water divination in front of Wing, there's some training in chapter 60, he makes the water so sweet compared to honey. This could be a reference to how Killua just poses more heartless family members by literally being sweeter and more palatable, or just extreme level treats such as chocolate. In the anime, when Gon performs the water, in the anime, when Gon performs the divination for the second time in front of Wing, he causes the water to not just overflow, but also begin to break the vessel, which could be possible foreshadowing to when Gon overdoes it with Nen by giving up everything and forcing himself into a grown-up adult form to face with the P2. In a sense, both these situations end up with Gon using too much aura and breaking a physical vessel. So I think the narrative does like to use the water divination as a bit of symbolism or character exploration. Also, yes, as I have implied, it does seem like the results of the water divination scale to how much aura is being used or mustered by the person performing it. If you're not proficient enough with Nen to perform a strong enough Ren, Gyo, etc., then nothing would happen. But passing this ambiguous threshold will cause changes in the water and or leaf of the divination, with the changes becoming more pronounced the more aura is used for the test. Hence why Gon and Killua's results are more extreme subsequent time to perform them after some practice. Hopefully you can see what I mean. If not, I plan to go over the various Nen types from not just a little perspective, but also a potential metaphorical or narrative perspective, both when covering each individual type and with our next method of defining discernment. Ahsoka managed to come up with a type of personality test that can be used to roughly guess someone's Nen type. Unlike the water divination by Ahsoka's own admission, this personality test method isn't perfectly accurate, and compares it to using something like blood types or zodiacs to figure something out about a person in chapter 62. It also implies he just sort of does it for fun. He also implies he just sort of does it for fun / entertainment. Whether the comparison to blood type / zodiac personalities adds takes away from this method's credibility can depend on who you ask, since to some this would mean the method is vague at best, if not completely inaccurate, if that's what we're comparing it to. But this is the relative with invisible magic martial arts, so sure. And Crow not only accurately gauges Gon's Nen type during their Heaven's Arena battle, but also correctly deduces that Bisky is probably transmuter in chapter 158 based solely on her mannerisms when she hides behind a tree. I actually won't go over the personality types Ahsoka assigned all the Nen categories in chapters 62 and 63 until I go through each Nen type individually, because I feel like it flows better and it will be more interesting that way. There was a third, and as of now, final way to determine the Nen type of someone. However, it seems to be used after someone has used Nen for a while and developed a certain pattern or habit in their aura, as opposed to something used early on in one's development. According to Furikov in chapter 370, it is possible to judge one's Nen type through observation alone with enough experience. It should be noted that these are very slight and minute differences, so not everyone has a skill needed to just eyeball someone's Nen type. And Furikov does also mention skill level, which implies that the results can be more or less pronounced depending on factors such as skill level, and probably isn't 100% accurate. Hold on, someone's calling me. Hello? I'm in the middle of something right now. Alright, bye. By default, most enhancers and transmuters have a soft and quiet 10 around the part of the body that activates their favorite attack. Emitters and manipulators tend to have a broader 10 that will turn a shade darker if they attempt to shrink it, And additionally, manipulators usually want to keep the hand they use for their abilities free, and that usually ends up being their dominant one. And conjurers have a stronger 10 around the wide part that activates their favorite abilities, but potential flow of aura everywhere else. Like manipulators, they usually want to keep their dominant hand free. We don't get anything for specialists, but I would assume, given how varied the category can be and function from person to person, there isn't as reliable or consistent way to tell based on subconscious aura flow alone, since it would kind of just depend on the specialist in question, and it could resemble other Nen types or look like something completely different. In chapter 369, Furikov reveals a way to separate non-users from non-users too. The iris of the non-user has little gaps in its circumference/edge when viewed from the side. I have to imagine that, like with his method dividing Nen types, these differences are very slight, since if they weren't, everyone would probably be trying to use them. But it's also possible that it's simply not a well-known method. The weakness of this method is that it cannot differentiate fully awakened non-users to those who are only half awakened. This would also lead me to assume that it doesn't tell you their skill level. What causes the discontinuous circumference of the iris is beyond me. Maybe it's the effective aura nodes or something else entirely. And we don't know if someone who can't see that would notice these details in the iris of an end user. Now I finally feel comfortable enough to get into the individual Now I finally feel comfortable enough getting into the individual Nen types. I will be going in clockwise order of the chart starting with enhancement. The exception to this will be specialization, since I feel like it makes more sense to cover last. I will also be discussing the personality type Tetsuzo assigned to each Nen type, and I will not only discuss the Nen types with what they can do literally, but what they might also metaphorically or symbolically represent in the narrative and or the characters that fall within them. I will also cover any misconceptions I feel are common or pertinent enough, and will try my best to emphasize the differences between each Nen type. Luckily for me, enhancement is one of the more straightforward Nen types, so it's a good one to start with. Enhancement involves using trick aura to boost or increase the natural abilities of an object or one's own body. One of the most straightforward ways in which this is done is by simply using the art of enhancement to boost one's own strength and or durability, such as with Gonar Uvagan. But it can be used to enhance the properties of other objects and not just yourself, like how Gudo does with his tops. And we have seen this category invoked for things outside of just straightforward super strength. For example, enhancement can be used to boost the growth of one's body to do things like heal unnaturally fast. Kurapika uses enhancement to give the holy chain of his thumb the ability to heal injuries, such as when he used it to quickly repair the arm that Uvagan fractured during their fight in chapter 84, with Kurapika stating it uses enhancement to achieve this. The character Bill is an enhancer that can use his Ergeron to greatly accelerate the growth of living things, as well as improve the abilities of Nen users. In chapter 388, Bill uses this ability to make a seed within a cup sprout mere moments by using enhancement to accelerate its rate of growth. However, there exists evidence to suggest that enhancement can do even more. The evidence takes the form of the character Dogman. Dogman is an enhancer who was granted a Nen ability by Morena's specialization ability Contagion, as revealed in chapter 405. The ability he now has grants him a supernatural sense of smell that allows him to smell the Nen type of someone within 5 meters, and smell if they've been awakened to Nen if they are within 2 meters of Dogman. Now, what exactly different Nen types smell like or a Nen user smells like is beyond me. While it's not completely impossible that Dogman is an enhancer using a different Nen type, he didn't actually learn Nen like an ordinary user. He was granted this ability by Morena's Contagion ability, and so far, all the abilities we have seen granted by said specialist ability match the Nen type of those who are affected. So all the conjurers seem to have conjuration abilities, emitters, emission abilities, etc. Dogman is able to boost his smell. Dogman being able to boost his smell does fit in line with the description of enhancement as a category that's about boosting a target's existing natural properties, as alluded to in chapter 60, such as a sense of smell, and it could explain why Togashi lists characters like Komugi as enhancers. It's possible that what Komugi is enhancing is one or more senses that her body has, or some other less obvious trait like reaction. This also helps us distinguish enhancement from the other Nen types a bit better. While transmutation and conjuration change or add things, enhancement only emphasizes physical attributes an object already has. If the target is solid, it becomes even more solid. If it has strength, it can become stronger. If it can smell better, etc. Which would also imply enhancement cannot be used to boost qualities that something doesn't have. So if you had literally no sense of smell, it stands to reason that you couldn't enhance it using this Nen type because there's nothing to actually enhance. It would also imply that the more something has it would also imply that the more something has as a quality, the more there is to enhance. So if you're already physically strong, there's more strength for your enhancement to boost. Or if you already have a good sense of smell, there's more to boost there. And we do know that factors like physical condition can matter with things like enhancement. A lot of people ask if enhancement can be used to change the properties of something, such as making skin metal. But there's no evidence this is the case. You would only be able to reinforce things the processes the object is naturally going through, like growth or regeneration. And even then, I don't know if you can say an answer rate at which metal rusts or something. This leads me to assume that, for example, you couldn't enhance the air until it becomes like a solid wall, since air is lacking any form of solidity. But feel free to debate the prospect of enhancing air resistance or something in the comments. Despite all this nuance, though, most enhancers and enhancement abilities seem pretty straightforward and involve using aura to enhance natural abilities of one's own body, such as strength, durability, or senses. Enhancement affinity is also usually thought of as being the best for combat, since even when not using their Nen abilities, an enhancer can more easily just overpower or outlast their foes by reinforcing their body and having a good spread of offense and defense. Uvogin was one of the best enhancers we have seen, and he could tank both shotgun rounds and anti-tank missiles in Chapter 75, which just goes to show you what a top-tier enhancer is capable of, although the rocket does still cause Uvogin pain. The overwhelming strength usually leads to enhancers having more simplistic techniques. For example, both Golem's Shinkan Rock and Uvogin's Big Bang Impact could easily be mistaken for something like a simple Ko by someone less well-versed than them, or audience members despite the actual versatility and or power behind them. I imagine part of what makes enhancement balance is also placed in the Nen chart. Category opposite to enhancement is specialization, and as I mentioned earlier, specialization works differently from the other categories. You either are or aren't a specialist. You can't be a non-specialist using specialist techniques. This means that non-specialists will always have a 0% affinity for specialization anyway. This leaves an enhancer with a 100% affinity for enhancement, 80% affinity for transmutation and emission, 60% for manipulation along with conjuration. Wow, okay, hold on. This leaves an enhancer with a 100% affinity for enhancement, 80% for transmutation and emission, and 60% for manipulation along with conjuration. Meaning they don't have any category at a 40% affinity, and they have at least a 60% affinity for the most common Nen types. Enhancement is also quite interesting in type because of some remarks about gender. I won't go over that in detail again since I went over the concept of Nen being influenced by gender/sex in this very article, so here's a shorter summary. In Chapter 388, Kurapika states that female enhancers are more likely to have supportive abilities, while males are more likely to have combative abilities. See Uvogin, making male enhancers with supportive abilities, like Bill, more of an outlier. This doesn't seem to be a biological difference, but rather culture, society, or life experiences influencing how demographics are more likely to use Nen. Although there is a mention of keeping your body in good physical shape being a factor when it comes to strengthening one's own body. But by the same token, we know practicing Nen can lead to unnatural levels of strength. Bisky, a transmuter, is super muscular and strong thanks to her Nen expertise and training. So we can assume with Nen that even if you do want to subscribe to a strict sexually dimorphic physical strength, the highest level of strength male and female Nen users could achieve is the same. When it comes to the water divination, the specific translation I use of Chapter 60 describes enhancers as causing the volume to change. While this could normally imply that some enhancers make the water level of the test go down, we have only ever seen the water level increasing, and examples of someone having your affinity for enhancement proven by the water level dropping has never been mentioned within the text or outside of it. So for now, I'm just going to assume the enhancer specifically caused the water to rise when taking a test. Bisky also proves useful in understanding the Nen types because she assigned each Nen type an extra that's meant to help someone get better at the aforementioned type. In Chapter 145, Bisky gets Golen and Kilowatt to practice their enhancement by using Shu and Cole to coat their aura around a rock before focusing. In Chapter 145, Bisky gets Golen and Kilowatt to practice their enhancement by using Shu and Cole to coat their aura around a rock before focusing all their Nen flow into the rock to boost the durability of the rock they are holding and smash other rocks with it, which does once again confirm that enhancement can be used on things besides the user's own body if there was any doubt. Also take a shot for example I said rock. The goal of the exercise is to smash 1,000 rocks a day without the practitioner's own stone breaking. If they manage to achieve this, they move on to to the next level of training. But if the rock shatters before that, they have to keep practicing at level 1. Although they can only try this practice once a day, because according to Bitsky, you should only train one type per day, because basic training should be the primary focus, and repetitive motion and stress performing this exercise seems to cause the performer to become less focused and lose concentration, according to Killua. The fact that Shu and Ko are used for this enhancement exercise also helps display how Nen types can have an impact even outside of specific Nen abilities. According to Hiso's personality test in chapter 63, and an omnibus that I cannot verify but does not seem to contradict any of the info I see in the manga, enhancers tend to be simple and straightforward in action and thought. They tend not to lie while generally being selfish and focused on their goals. Their techniques often reflect straightforwardness by being very simple and uncomplicated. Enhancers tend to have a soft, quiet tenor on the part of the body that activates their favorite attack. Before we move on to the next category, I have to ask, what are some of the themes of enhancement? To me, there's a very obvious narrative with a sort of stubbornness and unwillingness to quit. This makes sense because enhancers are about reinforcing and exaggerating traits that are already there. Something that is reflected in how, during the divination test, they cause the level of the water to increase, and in the anime, Gon seems to create enough water pressure to break the glass used for the test. I don't think it's explicitly confirmed that enhancers are making more water during the divination test, and I've always been under the assumption that they are somehow increasing the liquid's strength or pressure, somehow to make it rise. It makes sense that they would gravitate towards straightforward and emotional personalities with this in mind too, almost like they are the type to enhance and exaggerate their own feelings and emotions. The straightforwardness also makes sense from the angle that enhancers aren't just creating something like conjuration, but building upon what's already there in some way. However, it should be restated that not all enhancers are like this, and there are exceptions. You could have a thoughtful and rational enhancer, or one with a super complicated Nen ability. You could have a thoughtful and rational enhancer, or one with a super complicated enhancement ability, even if it's not as common. Enhancement often has a very physical quality to it, since it seems like it's simply restricted to physical objects, which makes sense too. Pretend being soft and quiet on the part of the body activates their favorite attack. It's probably just a straightforward representation of how they usually rely on boosting the traits of one or more body parts and or objects they interact with. If you take the water divination test and you find the water and leaves seemingly haven't changed in any way, then you should try tasting a bit of the water like Killua did in chapter 60. You may find that even though the water looks and acts the same, the taste is now different. This is the mark of a transmuter. The use of transmutation allows one to change the properties of their aura in order to have it mimic something else, as Wayne explained in chapter 60. However, unlike with, say, conjuration, you can also mimic individual properties or specific things instead of recreating the entirety of an object. It's clear based on the various characters we've seen that transmutation can be used to give one's own aura one or more properties of naturally occurring elements, like with Killua's electricity. Body parts like Sadaso's arm, man-made substances such as rubber and gum, with Konosuke's bungee gum, animals like Xeno's dragon. Xeno is an emitter, but he seems to be using transmutation for the dragons. While we'll touch on it later, the training Bitsky assigns for transmutation also implies that it is transmutation that is involved in changing the shape of one's aura, since her transmutation practice involves changing the shape of one's aura to form numbers. This makes sense since giving your aura a shape based on something like a number or object would be changing its qualities. Transmutation seems like one of the most poorly understood Nen types within the fan base, along with conjuration, and it's often mistaken for other types. Let's explain a bit here. One might assume that the ability to change the properties of one's aura would fall under manipulation, and using that category to control your aura or body. However, what manipulation entails is the infusion of your aura into an object or person in order to exert some level of control/influence over it, something that transmutation does not entail on its own. A lot of people also mistake transmutation for conjuration, and even in universe, it's possible to mistake one for the other very easily unless you know what you're doing. Transmutation is simply changing the properties of one's Nen to give it one or more traits of something else. This means that transmuted things can't be seen by non-users. Additionally, because transmuted things are still raw aura, like most aura, they will rapidly dissipate if they disconnect from the user's body, and the flow of the aura provides, unless something like emission is involved. This is different from conjuration because objects with conjuration can still sometimes have object permanence, even if many of them still seem to weaken if given enough distance from the user. So if someone conjured a doll, put it on the table, and ran a fair distance away, the dolls could potentially stay there even without a mission because the aura has become an actual physical object. But the dolls may become weaker or lose any special net abilities. This also means that non-users can by default see conjured objects unless someone is using in or otherwise finding them, which makes conjuration better for physical disguises. The transmutation allows for a level of flexibility and trickiness since you can mix and match different properties to create your aura. Transmutation allows for a level of flexibility and trickiness since you can mix and match different properties to cause your aura to suddenly change and don't need to make the object wholesale. For example, Hisoka gives his aura the property of rubber and gum. Not only that, but it seems like he can choose when and what parts are sticky, and it seems like he can make it suddenly more taut to pull himself around. But this could just be him using transmutation to mess with the aura shape and make it tighter or looser. Conjuration is actually creating the substance or object in question, so you couldn't just give something the properties of rubber and gum. It would actually be turned into rubber and gum, or just be coated in the stuff. To me, these differences can seem kind of nitpicky, but make it very clear that Togashi put some thought into this, and it's information that I think many people miss or don't look into. This will also be helpful when looking at transmutation abilities in the future and analyzing some of the themes they seem to carry. I've also seen some people have misconceptions on what transmutation can even do. Some people seem to be under the impression that transmutation can be used to change the quality of anything because of its name. However, transmutation is only about changing the properties of one's aura, and in fact, conjuration and/or manipulation seem to have more of a focus on changing existing physical objects in some way by either conjuring something in their place or exerting control over them. Some people then ask, then what is it you're transmuting? And while it's easy for one's mind to jump to alchemy or the like when hearing the term, the thing being transmuted is one's aura as opposed to any physical object. Google defines transmutation as the action of changing or the state of being changed into another form. So you are changing the state and or form of your aura, i.e. properties and or shape, into something else. So conjuration is actually closer to the alchemy category than transmutation. Transmuters have a 100% affinity for transmutation, obviously, 80% affinity for enhancement and conjuration, 60% affinity for emission, 40% for manipulation, and 0% for specialization. Bisky's level 1 transmutation training is called shapeshifting, and in chapter 146, it involves the student running as they count from 0 to 9 by forming their aura into the shape of each subsequent number at the top of their index finger. If the student can form the numbers 0 through 9 for a total of 10 numbers within 1 minute, they can proceed to the next level of transmutation training. However, the end goal of this exercise is to actually be able to form the practice in less than 5 seconds by rapidly forming the numbers. According to Hiso's personality test in chapter 62, 63, and an omnibus I cannot verify, transmuters tend to be whimsical and prone to deceit. Something that they once treasured can be considered trash the next day, and they often have unique characteristics while often putting forth a facade to hide truer aspects of their personalities. Even when they aren't hiding their personalities, they are not prone to revealing their true intentions and are often regarded as weirdos or tricksters. This whimsical, tricky, and unpredictable nature is often reflected in their nen by often relying on techniques that give their nen unique and unpredictable properties that tied to their personalities. Like enhancers, transmuters have a soft and quiet 10 around the part of their body that activates their favorite attack / ability. To me, it's obvious that transmuters is a very obvious. To me, it's obvious that with transmuters there's a strong narrative of change. This makes sense since while enhancers reinforce what is already there and conjurers create things, transmuters are changing aspects of their very life force directly by giving it new qualities. This change is reflected in their generally fickle nature. This change is reflected in their generally fickle personality and deception, the ability to change how one presents themselves or acts only to reveal it as a facade. This theme can also be seen in some of the character evolutions of transmuters. Killua's story is all about breaking away from his family and rejecting lifestyle of an assassin that his family has been trying to force him to take on since birth. And Yuppie is noted as being very instinctive, but during his battle with Knuckle and Co., he's noted as becoming more mindful and thoughtful, being able to direct his rage better with an actual goal in mind. There's even Bisky, who desperately wished to change her body and over time got a smaller, quote-unquote, cuter form she could switch to avoid her body dysphoria. even hide her true power and strength. Although we don't know what Nen type is involved in this transformation, I doubt it's simply transmutation by virtue of the fact that everyone can see the change, including non-users. But she herself is a transmuter. Finally, there's Hisoka, who's I guess. The nature of transmutation is also revealed in the water divination test itself. While categories like enhancement and conjuration create clear visible changes in the water that anyone can see, when a transmuter performs the test, the water looks unchanged. It is only the taste that has changed. So at first glance, it looks like nothing has happened to the water. This shows how transmutation cannot automatically be seen by non-users. The change only occurs to one's aura / life force as opposed to automatically being a physical one like conjuration or enhancement. Not to mention this can be one of the more subtle changes, since at first glance it may look like nothing has happened at all, or that the test taker has failed. But this is a facade with an unseen change occurring. The fact that the 10 of transmuters tends to be quiet and soft around the part of the body that creates their favorite ability is probably meant to reflect the part of the aura they transmute the most based on its location around their body. We've already touched on conjuration a little bit, but now we'll have a dedicated look at it. It can often be mistaken for transmutation, even in universe. So while I will bring up the differences, I will try not to harp on all of them here, since I already went into detail for some of them in the last section. The most obvious difference between conjuration and transmutation is the effects they create in the water divination test. When a transmuter performs the test, the water doesn't change physically, even though the flavor does. But with conjurers, there's a tangible, visible change to the water as impurities form within it. A reflection of how transmutation is used to change the quality and or shape of one's aura, but conjuration is used to form actual physical objects and substances. Conjuration, of course, allows for the physical creation of physical objects and materials out of one's aura, and there are plenty of examples of this being done within the series, such as Kurapika conjuring chains. However, it is clear that conjuration can be used to manifest something in place of or alter existing physical objects. For example, in chapter 391, the character Padaile is a conjurer who is granted the ability Fistful of Weapon, I'm coming to get you, by Mora's Contagion. Said ability allows him to turn his right hand to a variety of tools, such as a hammer and drill. Heinrich Bugendufno. Dude, this guy's last name. Heinrich Bugendufno. I'm just gonna go with it. Heinrich Bugendufno. Heinrich Bugendufno can use conjuration in the form of his ability Biohazard, sun in the palm of your hand, to turn inanimate objects such as cameras, guns, and handcuffs into animals. These constructs even seem to still have the function of the objects they originally were. For example, in chapter 391, Hiro turns a camera into a cat. The cat seems capable of recording like a camera in regards to what it sees when it's turned back into its original form. The ability to change physical real objects probably also explain part of the reason Kurapika's chains seem to change length when he slings them around sometimes. He's probably using conjuration to make more chain length or extend the length. This might also explain how I was conjured fun for the cloth chain things that are caught within it. In chapter 374, Kurapika explains that conjurers can also excel at creating laws and rules and fixing them to an area. This might sound confusing at first, since exerting control over something or someone else seems like it would be under the domain of manipulation, but it appears that the rules and laws made with conjuration don't involve infusing aura into a target like manipulation would. We also get an example of what Kurapika is talking about in regards to conjuration and law enforcement with the character Yokotani in chapter 399. Mora's Contagion granted him the contagion ability A Battle of Wits, LSDF, and narration explains it is a defense ability only usable in the hideout when Morana is present. It activates when Yokotani introduces himself to unlawful intruders. The conjured guards cannot harm the target, but the target's attacks also have no effect. When Yokotani sends these orders to attack, they say caution level 4 to targets charged with breaking entry and attempted murder, before Yokotani has them carry out a sentence of eviction to throw Nobunaga and Heinrich out of the hideout. So it would appear that the ability can be activated in response to someone breaking the law when entering the hideout. It's also not outside the realm of possibility that a conjurer could, say, create a room and give the room certain conditions or situations it can react to. Another example of what Karapika could be referring to would be an ability like Chitus, which can conjure an entire landscape that people inside cannot leave unless they finish a game of tag in Chapter 245. G2 is also a good example of conjuration being used to create entire landscapes that are cut off from the outside world, as seen in Chapter 245. The Hunter x Hunter fandom wiki claims that conjuration can also be used to create pocket dimensions, but I'm not 100% sure if that tracks. It's possible if they're arguing like Owl's Cloth, or she used tagging utilizes some sort of pocket dimension, but I can't find anything confirming that. They probably are referring to Nov's hide and seek, which involves creating a Nen space, and while I personally wouldn't be surprised if the physical rooms are created via conjuration, especially since it doesn't appear to be a normal building and is described as an artificial Nen dimension space in Chapter 246, so we do know it is an artificially created space of some sort, and not merely just an existing building that people are being teleported to and from. So my personal guess is that Nov is conjuring a simple set of rooms and using a mission to teleport people to and from it. This lines up with how, in Chapter 374, Kurapika also explains that the ability to isolate complete cutoff space is especially of emitters and conjurers. This could be the thing that the wiki is referring to, and to me, it reinforces the idea that Nov is probably using a combination of emission and conjuration for his hide and seek. Conjuration to create a physical room with emission to act as a way to bring people in and out, with emission and/or conjuration being used to cut the space off from the outside world. And it's not like the idea of emitters making use of conjuration despite it being opposite from emission on the chart is a foreign concept. For example, in Chapter 347, Ging seems to identify the gun-wielding attackers as emitters that are using conjure guns to unleash a barrage of projectiles, and says even though they're emitters, they're the type that would conjure guns, implying that it is possible but not recommended, even if we later learn that their weapons are actually conjured by Golem and not the wielders themselves. According to Nobunaga in Chapter 398, while conjurers can create special areas with specific rules, teleportation leans too much into a mission. So mission is definitely more the teleport category, even if both conjuration and emission have ways of sealing off areas. The affinity spread for conjurers is 100% in conjuration, 8% in transmutation, 0% in specialization, 60% in enhancement and manipulation, and a 40% in emission. Unlike transmutation, conjuration abilities seem to be capable of having a level of object permanence to them that Raw Ore does not, and they can be seen by non-users because they are physical objects. However, this isn't always true. It doesn't seem to render emission redundant. Some conjuration abilities may require the user to be within a certain distance or supply aura as a sort of restriction, and it is possible to render conjured objects invisible with techniques like in and potentially certain abilities / conditions, such as when Kurapika hides his conjured chains within Chapter 82. In Chapter 108, Kurapika states that while his chains are conjured, he does use manipulation and emission with Judgment Chain as a way to enforce a condition onto the target that must be followed, and control the blade and follow from a distance. He also states that normally this would be impossible for him to do, since removing the chain from its fastening point causes it to lose all its energy and force. This could imply that every instance we see of a conjured object being separate from the user actually involves mission in the Hatsu, but then you have cases like Yugatani in Chapter 399. Yugatani is another character who's granted an ability by Mora's Contagion, and is stated to be by the narration to be just a conjuration ability. Despite this, Yokotani's LCF seems to be able to place Nobunaga on high with a decent distance. However, it seems like Kurtopi can create copies of an object without emission, but it isn't directly stated, so I might be wrong. It's possible that what allows Yokotani's LCF to persist in the limitation. It's possible that what allows Yokotani's LCF to persist in the limitation that it can only be used in certain areas, while Morna is present in said area, because it's within range of some and style aura effect. But I would be surprised if that was the case because of how the net is portrayed, or because of how the summons are conjured and function. There might be something akin to actual robots, people, Nen beats, etc. that can keep operating without Yokotani being directly within arm's reach. My personal reading is that some conjuration abilities dissipate if they are too far from the user, but others can persist due to being actual objects. However, without something like a mission, if they are too far, they may literally just act like normal objects they are, or losing special Nen abilities, because some may need aura as fuel to do whatever. Additionally, categories like emission and manipulation can allow you to directly control and influence these physical aura constructs from a distance. However, even in these cases, conjuration still involves creating actual objects or substances in their entirety, and not just picking and choosing traits like you might with transmutation. This makes conjuration a bit limited in some respects, since you have to be more considerate of things like physics, even if there are clever ways to circumvent it. This also tends to make conjurers more reliant on things like conditions, limitations, and vows to set their Nen extra constructs apart from just normal, everyday objects by strengthening them or giving them strange Nen properties. According to Izunami chapter 83, it's impossible to make anything that is, quote, overly supernatural, unquote, with conjuration, and you cannot make something like a sword that can cut through anything and everything. Kurapika puts it another way when correctly answering Izunami's question by saying one cannot make something that goes beyond the human ability, such as a sword that can cut through anything that I just mentioned. Such an object couldn't be conjured. It's in this explanation that we can see why conjurers can be more thoughtful. A good conjurer kind of has to be, and your items have to be considered carefully. Kurapika and Izunami confirm that while you can't just summon a sword that cuts through anything, you could just summon an extremely sharp and durable sword. However, if that is literally all that's going for it, then you might as well just buy yourself a good saber and reinforce it with aura, even if you could make it disappear and reappear like a normal Nen construct for convenience, as explained in chapter 83. As Izunami says, in quote, as Izunami says, quote, in short, conjuring already existing objects doesn't always make an efficient weapon. In other words, it's difficult to make something better than God did. The users of conjuration have in their hands a force that's basically difficult to master in fights, unquote. Izunami tells Kurapika that while he can't make an unbreakable chain with conjuration, something close is possible with the right conditions and limitations. We see Kurapika achieve this by putting conditions and limitations on his chain to make it strong enough to bind even the physically strongest Phantom Troop members, the Enhancer. We see Kurapika achieve this by putting conditions and limitations on his chain to make it strong enough to bind even the strongest Phantom Troop member, the Enhancer Uvogen. This does tell us that while conjuration can obviously make more supernatural creations if done correctly, conjurers can obviously make more supernatural creations if done correctly. We have some people conjure Nen beasts or entities that seemingly otherwise don't already exist in the world of Hunter as far as we know, like Kite's crazy slot clown or Amangane's weird exorcism creature. And we have seen weird things like Shizuku's Blinky, which takes the form of a vacuum Nen beast that can inhale a seemingly infinite number of inanimate objects at the cost of not being able to inhale living things or things made with Nen. Plus, Blinky can only spit up the very last thing and inhale, and Shizuku can't bring anything else back. She's got big, man. Karate does people with big ass fucking shoes, bro. Also, he's going fucking insane on his art. Like, dude, look at this fucking background. You need to go that hard, man. Chill, bro. Where all these items inhaled by Blinky goes unknown, so it's not clear if they're being turned into something else, teleported somewhere else, taken to some conjured space, digested, or what. When given a heads up about Yukatani's LCF in chapter 406, Nobunaga describes it as a counter-attack ability in which attacking it triggers some sort of invincibility switch and level up. I'm not sure this would confirm that a construct like LCF is literally invincible because it could just be absurdly durable and strong. Like Kurapika's chains, and it's possible that it's just really hard to destroy. Alternatively, and more likely given how the narration explains the ability, the last word's indestructibility could be that it can't hurt its targets as a trade-off. So it cannot harm its targets in any way and vice versa. So the target has their own form of indestructibility from LCF itself, and the ability cannot hurt them. Kurtopi's own Nen ability got a fake allows him to conjure replicas of an object from his right hand as long as he touches it with his left. In chapter 103, it is stated that there is no size limit for what can be copied, although I have to imagine creating bigger objects requires more aura. In chapter 108, Kurtopi says his copies are like a form of N, allowing him to detect if someone entered one of his copied buildings. I can't be 100% sure this doesn't somehow involve other types of Nen, such as the mission, or only works on things in range of his aura. I think all this together tells us that it's helpful to think of conjured objects like an extension of one's aura and Nen, and you can use this to your advantage to give them supernatural properties. The most obvious example would be being able to make objects you conjure appear and disappear, since the objects are made of aura given physical form, and aura is normally invisible and not just a physical object. It makes sense that you may be able to return a conjured object into the aura it's made out of. Like all forms of Nen/aura, conjured objects can be affected by vows and restrictions or act as an extension of other techniques, such as N. And N can be used to hide conjured objects. And N can be used to conjure and in can be used conjured, and in can be used to hide conjured creations like any other flow of aura. Conjuration can be used to physically transform one or more parts of your body or other objects. But no novice presumably using conjuration in the form of the metamorphosis ability changes appearance in Chapter 4 of 5, since anyone and everyone can see the change, even non-users on the Black Veil. So that's the owl reference. Conjuration can be combined with other Nentets for different effects. There's healing, such as the healing chain Kurapika made by including enhancement that was shown off in Chapter 84. Although using it while his eyes were scarlet is probably why healing was so effective, like Judgment Chain's effectiveness. Unlike some of the other Nentets, we don't really get to see Biscuit's. Unlike some of the other Nentets, we don't get to see Biscuit's conjuration training, but we do get some details of the conjuration training Kurapika had to go through under Izanagi in Chapter 123. In Kurapika's case, it involved deciding on the object you want to conjure, a chain in his case, before spending much time with real chains day and night. They begin to close his eyes, they visualize the chains, make sketches of chains, touch chains, caress chains, and commit them to his 5 senses before they start having chains of chains, and then getting full on hallucinations and subsequently subconsciously summoning a chain. This also potentially involved understanding how it tastes, since Kurapika mentions committing the object to all 5 basic senses. And some people assume that this means you have to know how something tastes in order to conjure it, but I think the actual point of the training is that in order to conjure an object, you typically have to have an incredibly good understanding of what it is, what it's made of, and how it works. Unless you're some kind of nen genius that can intuit how to make those things on the fly, or have some specific ability or a proper restriction. The conjure things in question also usually have to be something that can actually function, which relates to Izanagi's comment about being able to conjure overly supernatural, which relates to Izanagi's comment about being unable to conjure overly supernatural things. Because being a car would just involve shaping your aura into a car and making it roll like one. But if you wanted to conjure an entire car, the car in question usually has to be able to actually run properly and have the necessary working pieces, unless you compensate properly with the inclusion of some other nen type limitations, vows, restrictions, etc. being applied correctly. According to Hisahiso's personality test, conjurers tend to be overly serious, stoic, and nervous. They're very observant and logical, really following the traps, being able to analyze things calmly is the strength of conjurers. Many of the items that conjurers create are often used by them deliberately, practically, and logically. Hopefully you can see how this might actually make a lot of sense considering the nature of conjuration. It also takes a lot of consideration and thought to make a conjuration blade that is practical and functional. Conjurers have a stronger antenna on the body part that activates their favorite abilities, potential or flow of aura everywhere else, probably correlating to the part of the body and aura they use to create their conjured objects. If we look at conjuration from a more thematic perspective, sorry, oh man, I've been talking for a while, I'm still tired. Oh shit, it's been 3 fucking hours. If we look at conjuration from a more thematic perspective, we can see an obvious theme on physicality. When the conjurer does the water divination test, impurities form within the water, creating substances / objects like conjuration abilities tend to do. Something that can also be physically seen in the water. Conjuration also seems to have a theme of paying close attention to detail. Once again, this makes sense since conjurers are actually creating objects and need to be mindful of that. Conjurers also need to have a really good understanding of how even simple objects work and behave, as we see with Kurapika's training. So there's this thread of understanding physical aspects of the world, and sometimes even understanding how to change them with a sort of groundedness and thoughtful reasoning. Conjuration abilities also seem like they usually have more complex. Conjuration abilities also seem like they are usually more complex in function than most enhancer abilities, which usually lean towards more simplistic. I'm also going to skip specialization, even though I said I would tackle Nen chart in clockwise direction. The reason for this is because a massive part of what specialization is comes down to understanding what the categories are not. So we'll circle back to specialization after we cover the remaining 9 categories, which you would know if you were paying attention to me, unlike my cold-hearted Distant Lover, Green Island, Pirate, and PC. In Chapter 61, we are told that if the leaf floating in the water moves upon someone taking the water divination test, they're a manipulator. We explained in Chapter 60 that manipulation can be used to manipulate both living and non-living things with aura. This control seems to be exerted by a user infusing their aura into a target, since in Chapter 82, Ubogen says that manipulators can pour the most aura into an object, and in Chapter 388, But Mignon says that if Kurapika was using manipulation to force the windows of other people open, either partially or fully, his aura would be mixed with theirs. This, of course, means manipulators are usually reliant on some sort of physical medium or object to control, such as Kaito Zobak's paper, or exact control over things, like how Illumi controls people with needles. It can actually sometimes be quite hard to detect if someone is under the effects of manipulation. Killua had a needle from Illumi in his head, exerting some control over him for years without really anybody seeming to notice, or at least mentioned it, from what I can recall. And in chapter 388, Breakoff says he cannot tell Kurapika is using manipulation to awaken the notes of his class with only one person as a reference. He had to see multiple people to reach a 100% certain conclusion. Not all applications of manipulation are created equal, since how much control one has over a target or medium can depend on various factors. Limitation and not all applications of manipulation are created equal, since how much control one has over a target or medium can depend on various factors, such as limitations, conditions, etc., of the ability in question. It is also known that the stronger of an emotional connection one has to an object, the better it works as a medium. In chapter 50, Wing says that part of the reason Gudo can control his thoughts so well is probably because he has a strong connection to his thoughts. I know Gudo is an enhancer, but Wing confirms that Gudo is also applying a form of manipulation in chapter 60 to exert some level of influence over the tops and aid in their spinning. So things someone has a strong emotional connection to tend to work better as a medium or conduit for manipulation as opposed to random objects. In chapter 106, Sherlock also notes manipulators still need to develop and master whatever it is they're manipulating or using to manipulate other things, or else there's a high chance it will lack power and accuracy. There are also some general rules that we know all manipulators, no matter skill level, tend to be restricted by. There's the first come first serve rule explained in chapter 226. Manipulation cannot be used to control a target that is already under the effects of another user's manipulation, presumably no matter how powerful and or skilled either of them are. Also, generally, the greater the control one can exert over something with manipulation, the more restrictions they need. The more difficult / the restrictive the condition / limitation is, the greater control afforded. This can range anywhere from a specific limit on how many targets you can manipulate to what is an eligible target, to even something like having to make physical contact with a target or just having to pour more nen into something. Some examples of limitations would be Illumi having to stick his needles into people he wants to manipulate, Gudo only controlling his tops, Moro manipulating the smoke he wants to make with his pipe, Moro manipulating the smoke he makes with his pipe, Sholmark having his black voice set to his phone and antennae, the latter of which must be stuck into a target, etc. In universe, manipulators can be quite scary to face in combat, because if you don't know what their abilities and restrictions actually are, there's always a chance they could have something that can control you directly once one or more conditions are met. Meaning unknown or unaccounted for manipulators could potentially have a potential one-shot. For example, if Sholmark gets someone with his black voice, or Illumi with his needles, they could just make the person kill themselves, run around till they die, sit still as they attack them, etc. Illumi's abilities in particular permanently cripples the manipulated target. An example of this at play would be during Corolla and Hisoka's fight in chapter 351. In chapter 50, Wing also explains that the type of object being manipulated matters too. Complex objects and living beings can be given much more complex and nuanced auras than something more simplistic like a spinning top. In the same chapter, Wing also confirms that the size of an object matters too. The bigger an object, the more auras needed to complete. In the same chapter, Wing also confirms that the size of an object matters too. The bigger an object, the more auras needed to manipulate it. Kind of like how you need more electricity to power bigger machines and devices. Kurapika also confirmed in chapter 372 that messing with someone's memories can be done with manipulation and is often symbol of a manipulator's attack. In chapter 372, 374, and 381, in chapter 372, 374, and 381, most of it is explained in 372, we get some details regarding different types of manipulation abilities. Although I should clarify that it doesn't seem like one has a natural affinity for any of these manipulation categories or anything. So I don't think it's some kind of miniature nen chart from the larger one. Instead, it's probably really just meant to group together common traits or conditions manipulation abilities have. Listing abilities involve leaving the free will of a victim intact, but forcing them to operate under a certain condition that works in favor of the one doing the manipulating. An example of this given would be rewriting the target's memories while leaving their free will intact, so they're operating with incomplete information or can be tricked into doing something. This type of manipulation can be used to influence several different targets, but also consuming a small amount of aura. Of course, the trade-off is how much control you actually have over the target, since you aren't full on robbing them of free will. Oh, I might need to stop for tonight. I want to get this all done tonight, but Dude, this is really tiring. I don't know how people that stream for like 12 hours. Some people just like wake up and like, I'm gonna stream for 12 hours today. And I'm just like, are you insane? Okay. Coercive abilities are simply ones that involve coercive abilities are simply ones that involve completely taking over the victim's mind and by to exert full control. But it's obviously more limited in how many targets it can control at once, since we know it requires more order to pull off. Pseudo-coercive abilities are ones that take over the body of a target while leaving their mind intact or forcing them into a situation in which they have no choice but to follow the manipulator's orders. Momose's Guardian Spirit Beast is a good example of this. The Nen Beast in question will show up near a target and continually ask if they are free. If the target says no, they will eventually have to deal with this process repeating over and over until they agree. Once this happens, the Nen Beast takes control of the host. So basically, while coercive involves your mind and body being puppeted, pseudo-coercive abilities give the illusion of choice or just railroad someone into following them or command by controlling their body, but not their minds or memories. I imagine the downside is that the target is more likely to be able to warn other people of what happened during or after the ability goes off, because their perception and memories aren't being messed with as much. If you control someone's mind or alternate memories, there's less of a chance that they even know what happened or can warn others and share information. Induction type is apparently what Slide Beast makes use of, as mentioned in chapter 374. It's not directly explained what this entails, but we can make some assumptions based on what we see of Nen Beast. Rihan goes over how the Nen Beast uses the beast of induction to spread its influence, and while the level of control it has over its victims is weak, it can manipulate a great number of people. We also know that Solid Nen Beast what Solid Nen Beast does is produce a smoke that, when inhaled for long enough, will turn someone into a carrier with a miniature version of the Nen Beast above their head, and will harbor good favor towards their restrictive Kakian prince. So I assume that the diffusion induction type doesn't completely rob someone of free will, like coercive, but pushes certain emotions or opinions in a certain direction. The fact that it doesn't grant complete control over target and their actions is probably why it can influence so many people. Maybe it can control a particular target, emotions, or opinions to either like something more or less, but not the mind entirely. Probably it all seems to leave the body intact. I cannot be 100% certain though, and this is just my educated guess. Rihanna says that Solid Nen Beast is induction through diffusion. So I imagine the diffusion part is how it spreads from person to person and multiplies. According to Google, the definition of diffusion is the spreading of something more widely, and induction means the action or process of inducing someone, position, or organization. So it's possible that diffusive manipulation abilities are those that spread across multiple targets. Like a disease, inductive ones are those that try to form some sort of group or following. Induction can also mean the process or action of bringing about or giving rise to something, which takes us back to the original theory of abilities that target specific emotions or opinions. In this case, inducing them would be giving rise to them or increasing them. Manipulators have 100% affinity for manipulation, 0% for specialization, 8% for mission, 60% for conjuration and enhancement, with a 40% for affinity for transmutation. One question I've seen floating around a bit is what the difference between manipulation and mission actually is. This is a fair question, since manipulation abilities can seemingly also have a lot of range by virtue of being something with or carry out complex orders, and decent enough range even without a mission. Gudo doesn't need to use a mission for his tops, for example, and it's possible to have a manipulation that allows you to actively give orders with things like a device or your voice. The difference is pretty simple though. Manipulation is infusing one's aura into a target, while a mission is just separating aura from your body. With a mission, you aren't putting the aura into an object. This also means that manipulators usually need some sort of medium to use in the form of something like an object or substance, while emitters won't as often have this requirement. I guess I could put it this way. Manipulation is being able to sort of store aura within an object like a battery to control it, and emission is just separating it like a projectile. Emission also includes abilities like teleporting. So if you see someone just lob a bunch of aura at someone, that's emission. But if someone is, say, controlling a physical doll, that's manipulation. Of course, you can mix these by doing things like emitting a projectile that, once it makes contact with a target, grants you control over it. Unfortunately, despite all the info we have on manipulation in the form of this classification, we haven't yet seen any training regimens for it yet. This key or otherwise. These are useful personality tests describes most manipulators as argumentative and logical people that advance at their own pace. They usually want to keep those they care about safe, but may not listen to what others have to say about it when it comes to their own goals. While hinges tend to have simpler techniques, manipulators often make use of techniques that allow them to control their opponent, such as the Loomis needles, or something inanimate, such as a Morel snake. Unrelated to the personality test, we have seen manipulators control their own bodies. In chapter 227, Sheldrake sticks one of his antenna into himself in order to enter some sort of autopilot mode. So if anyone was wondering, yes, it seems you can use manipulation on your own body. It's also important to point out that manipulation doesn't have to grant complete control over a target. Sometimes it takes the form of basic commands or reactions to things falling as opposed to 1% conscious control all the time. Manipulators usually have a broader antenna that turns darker if they tend to shrink it. Manipulators usually having a broader antenna that turns darker if they tend to shrink it probably leads to how manipulators and emitters tend to have a bit more range to their techniques and often have more external range for their aura. In case of emitters, it comes from the ability to separate their aura from their body, but for manipulators, it comes from being able to infuse their aura into a target. It could also be that their aura is sort of stressed from using it to manipulate things that meet a certain condition or range. The tendency to keep the hand they use for their abilities free probably has to do with manipulators requiring something like a physical medium for their abilities. And your hands are probably something you will use to act as that medium for most people. To me, the overarching theme manipulators tend to have is less clear than some of the other 9 categories, but there's definitely an emphasis on control, which makes sense because manipulation is all about infusing your aura into something as a way to exert control over it. The fact that they invented their own pace want to keep their loved ones safe, but don't listen to what said loved ones may have to say when it comes to their own goals, potentially leads oneself to someone who is controlling it as what they think is best for the people around them. When they take the water divination test, leaf in the water moves, which doesn't sound like the most mind-blowing result because you could achieve the same effect by just blowing a leaf a bit, even if it is an on-the-nose way of showing that manipulation is about controlling things, such as the leaf in the water. Their propensity to be argumentative and logical could also relate to a desire to control things around them, or even control their own emotions. There's a push to have everything calculated and under control. You could also read manipulators on the beat of their own drum as a sort of resistance being limited by or controlled by outside forces that are likely enough. Also, this could be reflected in how their abilities often involve literally controlling other people / things. The first come, first serve will prevent the first come, first serve rule that prevents the first come, first serve rule that prevents another manipulator from overriding control of a target someone is already influencing. And in a way, these could be seen as making things at the manipulator's pace for whatever purpose. So I think I'm actually going to take a break here. I might come back and stream later tonight. And I just realized how long I've been streaming. I'm streaming for like 4 hours. There's going to be a lot of stuff to go through, and I've been streaming for like 3 hours, 3.5 hours. So I will probably stop for now, and I will probably come back to this either sometime today or tomorrow. I want to do it today because ideally tomorrow I would be able to dedicate to Magic the Gathering because the Planeswalker's Guide to the Edge of Eternities. So yeah, so I'm gonna stop for now. I'll see you guys either later tonight or tomorrow. I should probably have a better plan.